Blog Talk Radio.
You and your whole fucking congruent and tepid. So when I Pearl Harbor, don't let me catch you intrepid. I'm telling you, the wishbone been broken, my favorite crumb cake, your mistake. Enterprise is the indelible, the number one field back crew of the season. Just give me one reason to splash, let's another flag half-mast take down the wallow. Company flow, the toughest penis, sucky. So of course in an attempt to defend, you end up on camp. Plus this agent can...
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice greed. At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
That is not true. The Maafa continues into the 21st century. And what we wanted to show was something that a lot of us that have worked in the pro-life movement for years have always known, but it's one of those things that you just knew but you never set out to prove, that the original motivation for the legalization of abortion was not, as is commonly believed through the marketing hype of the so-called pro-choice crowd, it was not women's rights or privacy or reproductive freedom or pro-choice or any of that. Those were, again, just marketing slogans that were used to justify the legalization of abortion, but the real motivation behind it was eugenics. It was the latest mechanism by which a certain select group of ultra-wealthy elitists in this country were going to try to enforce this idea of controlling populations by controlling certain elements of those populations. And what we had known for a long time was that the element of population they wanted to control was the African American community. Not control as much as eradicate, but that this was the original motivation behind the legalization of abortion. And we set out to be able to prove this beyond just being able to just saying it ourselves and saying that we believe this was the motivation for it. We wanted to find the documentation to prove it. And again, we spent a little over 3 years during the research on this. And I have to admit that what we found in many cases stunned even me. I sometimes think that I'm somewhat jaded after 30 years in this battle, but some of the things that I found as we were researching this for this documentary were pretty shocking as it relates to the issue of race and how that played into the legalization of abortion.
Wow. I know it has been corrected, but some of my listeners said that they missed the first portion, so I just want to make sure that I repeat guest for today's program, Mr. Mark Crutcher. He is the president and founder of Life Dynamics Incorporated. He is the writer, director, and music editor for the documentary film Maafa 21, Black Genocide in 21st Century America. Mr. Mark Crutcher, our guest for today's program. Before I definitely want to share more information from the documentary and what you just talked about, before we go forward, I did want to ask, you are a white man, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The name of this program, The C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system that is dominated by racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you feel that such a system exists, and do you think that is an accurate definition for that system?
Obviously, you can't deny that racism exists. I don't think that's even a debatable position. From what we have researched in this, the issue goes beyond simply race and goes to the issue of elitism and eugenics. If you go back to if you go back and study the days, which is where we began, by the way, we began our research in the late 1700s and up to the mid 1800s. That was the jumping off point for our research.
Yes, sir.
What we were looking at was the actions that were taken by the people in this culture who had made their incredible fortunes off the backs of slaves. And make no mistake about it, there, as we found and we point out in the documentary, there are major international, multinational, billion-dollar corporations on the New York Stock Exchange today who originally made their money in the slave trade, either directly or indirectly or as a peripheral agent, like insuring slave ships or whatever it might be. There were a lot of different ways that these people made their money in the slave trade. And one thing I, just as a side issue here, I often point out is it's tempting for us today to look and say that the to look back at slavery and say that the hub of slavery was Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia or the cotton plantations of the South, when in reality the hub of slavery in America was Wall Street in New York. Everything in the slave trade was basically controlled from that venue. The cotton plantations were basically just where the labor was done, but the mechanism by which this was carried out was in New York. And that continues even to this day with the Eugenics movement, which is still headquartered in New York. But in any event, what we looked at was the attitudes of these people as they began to feel that the approach of the end of slavery was approaching. You have to remember that in the early 1800s, the slave owners in America, these white, ultra-wealthy elitists who had created this system, were at least smart enough to recognize that slavery had ended with all of our trading partners. It had ended with our closest neighbors in both Mexico and Canada, and that it was unrealistic to expect that it was going to continue here in the United States. The rumblings were there, whether they thought, they didn't know how it might end, but they were concerned that it would end. And what they were mainly concerned about was what would happen when you released 4 million slaves into the society and you had artificially kept these people uneducated and basically unemployable anywhere but the cotton field. What was going to happen when you released them? And they weren't concerned, contrary to what a lot of people think, their concerns were not just about retribution or anarchy or, people like Nat Turner. The ultra-wealthy can always isolate themselves from those problems. What they were concerned about was what the financial impact would be. You have to remember that there were 4 million slaves in a nation that had far exponentially fewer people than it has today. So 4 million people represented a much greater percentage of the population than it does today. And if you think about just...
Mr. Crutcher?
Yes, sir.
I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to check because it seems like it's deviating a little bit from the question, and this is real important because I want to kind of get a framework for our discussion because I definitely want to get more involved into exactly what you're talking about. But I did want to just make sure I got a clear answer to the question, which was global system of racism, white supremacy. Do you think it exists? And the definition that I have for both racism and white supremacy, which is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe who they classify as not white. Do you feel that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I can't tell you if that definition is accurate. What I look at it, what I see, and again, this goes back to the research that we did and the reason I was going down that trail. What we saw was that the problem is elitism, in that these people consider themselves better than people that aren't like them. And that very often and normally does translate into racism. It's very tempting. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, then you're saying that the real problem is not racism but elitism. I'm saying that that's the root problem, but that the outgrowth of the elitism is always racism. Because the people that tend to have this elitist mentality do tend to be and not just the everyday ordinary white guy or even the wealthy white guy. I'm talking about the ultra-wealthy white elitist, and we still have a lot of them in existence today. And that is the origin of this problem.
Okay. I want to make sure I like to highlight things to make sure people don't miss information. You said that you feel that elitism, that is the underlying problem, but the problem is that this elitism always produces racism. Is that
it manifests itself as racism.
Okay. And you said you would not say that definition is accurate. Do you believe that we're in a system of racism, white supremacy, where white people dominate the non-white people worldwide? Do you think that's accurate?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you took all what you and I might agree are the so-called moneyed and powerful in the world, and you rounded all these, say the top 1,000 people in the world who have money and have power and control the lives of all the other people that live on this planet, the overwhelming majority of those people, of those 1,000 people, are going to be white.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that their attitude is not born of necessarily racism. Racism is how their elitism manifests itself. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but they see themselves as superior to all the other peoples on the earth from an elitism and a eugenics standpoint. And by natural extension, that manifests itself as racism.
Okay. I guess as I'm a non-white person, victim of racism, white supremacy, I would say that just for me, it would seem to make logical sense if the manifestation, the result of this elitism is always racism, white supremacy, that I would say maybe the starting point, the foundation for all of this is racism, white supremacy, since that's always what we end up with and that's always how it's expressed. But that might just be my opinion. I could be incorrect.
Well, and you and I may be splitting hairs here. I think one thing that's very interesting that we stumbled across in our research, and it may go to the very point that you're raising here. If you study the man who is now called the father of eugenics, his name was Francis Galton. If you study this man, you find some very interesting things about him. First off, he was extraordinarily wealthy. His family had made their money in the slave trade. He was also the first cousin of Charles Darwin. And if you start studying and Darwin and they worked together, basically what you find out is that Darwin was kind of the philosopher, and Galton, his cousin, who is now called the father of eugenics, who actually made up the word eugenics, he was the guy who put this stuff into practical application. And the fundamental thing that people need to understand about what Galton and Darwin believed is this. They believed that if you looked at life as a continuum that begins with the lowest form of primate and continues up the chain until you get to the very top, which they said was the Aryan or the Mediterranean, basically white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian. If you look at that continuum, when you reach the highest form of primate, which they said was the gorilla, then the next step, obviously, is the lowest form of human, right? If you're buying into their philosophy.
Right.
Their argument was, and we found quotes that we included in the documentary, their argument was that the distinction between the highest form of primate, the gorilla, and the lowest form of human, which they said was the African and the Aborigine, the distinction between those two was very, very minimal, almost zero. And that the human race would be bettered the larger that gap was. And that the way you make that gap larger, obviously, is to get rid of those humans who were closest to the gorilla, which they said was the African and the Aborigine. And that's the origin of the eugenics mindset. So, again, it kind of goes to this issue of not necessarily that they saw, I mean, they did see blacks as inferior to whites. There's no argument about that, both mentally and physically. They believed that, or they claimed to have believed it. And I'm not always convinced they actually did. But they claimed to have believed that, and I think a lot of times they didn't actually believe it. They just thought this fits the agenda that they had, so they went along with it.
Again,
go ahead.
Again, our guest, Mr. Mark Crutcher, founder and president of Life Dynamics Incorporated. The information that you've been sharing thus far, I think, very important. I think non-white people really need to know this information. And I'm going to ask some questions, I guess, so you can share your view on why you think this is important for non-white people to know. I'm just curious. You said you are a white man. Why did you want to do this work, to share this information with non-white people, and what is your ultimate goal with the documentary film Maafa 21?
Well, obviously, I don't make any bones about the fact that I'm a pro-life individual. I run a pro-life organization. We are opposed to abortion. And what we are trying to do here is make people understand what the real motivation was behind the legalization of abortion. If you're trying to convince people that abortion is immoral, it's wrong, you can't condone it, you can't justify it, you have a much more difficult time of that if they believed there were altruistic motives for legalizing it to begin with. In other words, if they can say to themselves, if the public can say to themselves, as they do, by the way, I'm not really that comfortable with abortion, but I think that basically the motivation behind those who were pushing it was correct and at least justifiable, if not justified, at least justifiable. And what we have fought against in the pro-life movement all these years are these myths like this, that it was about women's rights, or it was about privacy, or it was about reproductive freedom, or any of these other things that I referred to earlier as basically marketing tools. Mm-hmm. And so we want to show that this is the real motivation for it. If the American people want to look out here and say, okay, we understand the motivation behind the legalization of abortion was and continues to be to this day to eradicate certain groups of people based on their race, we're okay with that. There's not much else we can say to them. But at least I want to hear them say that. And right now they don't have the opportunity to say that because they don't know this information is being hidden. The fact is being hidden that in America today, even the abortion industry's own statistics show that a black baby is 5 times as likely to be aborted as a white baby. They don't show, the American people don't know that the abortion industry's own figures, again, show that black women make up less than 13% of the population. They have 37% of the abortions. They don't know that the number one abortion provider in this country is Planned Parenthood and puts almost all of its facilities in African-American neighborhoods or near African-American neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They don't know that the government research showed before the legalization of abortion was accomplished in 1973, the government had put out studies showing that when abortion is illegal, white women have abortions at 5 times the rate of black women. But the moment you make it legal, that completely reverses, and black women have an abortion rate 5 times as high as white women. And these are the things that people need to understand, that the goal here of all these people who had for years rejected abortion and said that you could never legalize abortion, all of a sudden in the late 60s started calling for it to be legal. And there's a very good reason why they did it and why they did it at that time.
Okay. Some people are making interesting comments about your comments in the chat room. I wanted to make sure I highlighted that for my listeners. You said that I asked what your ultimate goal and purpose of doing Maafa 21 was, and you said that you wanted to get out accurate information about the fact why abortion was made legal, and giving out that accurate information that abortion was made legal to reduce the numbers of people based on race, specifically to reduce the number of non-white children being born in this area of the world, and that you wanted to make people aware of that so that they could, I would think, so that more people might reconsider how they feel about abortion. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to really share quite a bit, as much of the information as we have time for, from the film, because I think it's very important. But I do want to call out, it's been my experience, and I could be incorrect, non-white people tend to be uninformed about a lot of the things that you're saying. So if I could request, you can't really talk to non-white people like we know this stuff, because it's been my experience that we tend to be very ill-informed about the whole history of eugenics and the American Birth Control League and its connection to Planned Parenthood, and we just tend to not be very well educated about all this. So
when you say we, who do you mean?
Non-white people.
Okay.
Yes, sir. But I am a non-white person myself, so I'm definitely included in that.
Okay.
I wanted to kind of give a little more background information from the film, and then I kind of want to come back to what you said about, in your view, the evidence shows that abortion was legalized for the specific purpose of reducing the number of non-white people in this particular area of the world. But I want to kind of give some more information so we can walk to that point. If you could you talk just about the early portion of the eugenics movement, early 20th century, specifically individuals like Mr. Lothrop Stoddard, Madison Grant, and if you could share your understanding of the term eugenics, what that means, and what the people who believed in eugenics, what they wanted to do, so that everyone is real clear about that.
Well, again, you have to go back to understand this. You have to go back to those days during which these people began to wonder what was going to happen once the slaves were freed. Because it ties. This is how eugenics began. These ultra wealthy elitists who had made their fortunes, and they were obscene fortunes made on the backs of slaves. These people were concerned about the economic impact of slavery. Of ending slavery. Their first strategy, as I'm sure you're familiar, was what was called colonization, the idea that you could send all the slaves back to Africa. That proved for a variety of reasons to be completely unworkable. Mm. And once they came to that realization, the panic really started to set in. And it was at this exact same moment in history, and we said all this stuff, we started out with a timeline, like you do in a criminal investigation. You put a timeline of what happened when, because then you can look at it, and you're looking for things that occurred concurrently, because those are always major clues to solving the crime. Mm. When we set this thing out on a timeline, some things really jumped out at us. And one of those was that every time something happened, these guys came up with a plan. Every time it failed, all of a sudden a new plan was developed, and it may not appear to have anything to do with the first one. For example, when colonization was abandoned, and by the way, a lot of people may not realize this. They think that this was just kind of a flighty idea and never taken very seriously, this idea that you could send all the slaves to Africa. But the reality is that the American Colonization Society was funded by the U.S. Congress. This was an idea that was taken extremely seriously. This was the solution that they thought would work. Mm-hmm. When it didn't, when it failed, it is at almost that exact same moment in history when Galton was coming out with his theories about eugenics, and Darwin, his cousin that he worked closely with, was coming out with his theories about the origin of species and how we're all related to, how we're all interrelated to each other, and then how we're interrelated with primates. My view is that the ultra-wealthy elitist at that time, and I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming of this, that they began to say, okay, what are we going to do with all these people? Now that we can't send them all back to Africa, what the devil are we going to do with them? And here comes this guy who says, look, we need to make the human race better. And the way you do that is you get rid of all those people who are closest to the ape. And by the way, the people who are closest to the gorilla are the African and the Aborigines. We don't have any Aborigines, so who does that leave us with? Africans. And I think that these ultra-wealthy elitists bought that into that eugenics philosophy, not because they believed it or that they had looked at it and studied it and said, oh, this makes sense. They didn't care whether it made sense or not. All they knew is that this was a way to solve what they considered to be a problem that at that time it was now being known as the Negro dilemma. Mm. And so they glommed onto this eugenics philosophy. And that because, again, as a practical matter, not because they believed it, it just solved a problem. And so that launched a chain of events that continues into this day. As each eugenics thing was tried and then began to either not work or failed or was outlawed or whatever it was, the next eugenics philosophy was embraced. And I'll give you a classic example of this. You mentioned starting in the 1920s and how this eugenics stuff ties together with abortion and the origins of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood and the American Birth Control League and all that. In the early 1900s, the American eugenics movement concluded, and we document this fully in the DVD, they concluded that the solution to what was called the Negro dilemma was sterilization. And they started setting up sterilization boards. Now, this is a period of history that is, even though it occurred, in the relatively recent times, I mean, you're talking about less than 100 years ago, it's a period of history that most people don't know much about, white people or black people. But there were eugenics boards set up. Sometimes they were called sterilization boards. There were eugenics boards now being set up around the country. The first one was set up in Indiana in 1913. Eventually, there were 31 states with official eugenics/sterilization boards. These boards continued in existence, and a lot of people say, well, they go out in the 1920s or something, 1930s maybe. The last one was in Oregon in 1984. That's when the last sterilization board or eugenics board was disbanded. It's now known that most of these boards did not keep records. Some of them that did keep records never released the records to the public. And some of the states, there were 31 states that had eugenics boards. Of the other states, many of them had eugenics boards. They just weren't officially sanctioned by the state, so no statistics were ever kept. We now know that of the boards that did keep records, at least 150,000 women were sterilized, almost all of whom were black. Under federal programs, there was a federal lawsuit that was brought back in the 1960s over this issue. Under federal programs, it's estimated that as many as another 250,000 were sterilized. Now, these women were, again, overwhelmingly black. Many of them were sterilized without their knowledge, and many more of them were sterilized against their will. In the DVD, as you know, I'm sure you remember, Gus, we interviewed one of these people, a woman named Elaine Riddick.
Yes, sir.
From North Carolina. Elaine, at the age of 13, was grabbed off the street and raped by an older man in her neighborhood who threatened to kill her. She became pregnant from that encounter, and of course, 9 months later had a baby, had a son. Years later, Elaine got married, and I think she was 19 or 20 when she got married. And she and her husband agreed they wanted to have a big family, so they set out to have a family. She was not able to get pregnant. Eventually, she went to a physician to find out why she couldn't get pregnant, and she told me, we didn't put it in the DVD, but she told me that he looked up at her. Her feet were in the stirrups. He looked up at her and said, "Who butchered you?" It turns out that when she was pregnant at 13 with the child of a rapist, when she was delivering that baby, they sterilized her without her knowledge.
Wow.
This was a very common practice that we now have documented. This was an extremely common practice. It was also common for African-American women who were pregnant to be told that if they didn't get sterilized, their family would lose all their welfare benefits. This was untrue, but they didn't know that, and very often they would. It even went to the extent, Gus, that families were told that if you don't bring in your children to be sterilized, you will lose your benefits. The result of that was that we found documentation on children as young as 10, girls as young as 10 years old being sterilized. Wow. Elaine told me that she had personally talked to girls that are now women, of course, at this age, but women who had been sterilized as young as 8. These sterilization boards were seen by the eugenics community, and especially by organizations like the American Birth Control League, which later became known as Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood was actually, in some states, for example in Arkansas, the state eugenics board was Planned Parenthood. So they were closely aligned with these organizations.
Right.
They saw sterilization as the key to solving what they call the Negro dilemma. The problem became that in the mid-1960s, early 1960s, mid-1960s, in that range, they began to worry that these state eugenics boards and these state sterilization boards were going to be found unconstitutional. Federal courts were already starting to make those kind of rumblings, and as a matter of fact, there were some rulings that caused problems for these state eugenics boards. And these people became absolutely convinced that a time was coming when these state eugenics boards would be outlawed. It was at that point that these same organizations and same government entities began calling for the legalization of abortion. You literally had organizations, and again, I'll use Planned Parenthood as an example, and Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who was a member of the American Eugenics Board, American Eugenics Society. You had these people who were at one point saying, look, abortion is not the way to do this. The American people will never stand still for abortion. They see it as murder. Most people recognize that the unborn child is a living human being. The American people will never stand for abortion. We're not for it. We're not pushing it. But at the moment they began to lose the sterilization boards, they did a 180. And all of a sudden, not only were they saying, well, you know, the legalization of abortion is probably going to be where we're headed, they not only were saying things like that, they were working for that. And again, it goes back to this thing of you can't see it as a coincidence where every step along the way in this eugenics, this march toward eugenics, you can't see it as a coincidence that every time something didn't work, something else was new there to take its place. And eugenics, the move from sterilization and these eugenics boards into legalized abortion was just the latest example of that. There were many examples that we cited as we went through the documentary of how this happened, and I'm sure you remember some of those examples. But this is, and one of the interesting things about this, and this is something that I think will stun most of your listeners. It certainly stuns most of the pro-life community. I can tell you this for sure, and that is this. If you were to ask the average American, including people in the pro-life movement, to give a brief thumbnail history of the pro-life movement, I think what you'd find is that most of them would say that the pro-life movement began as a response to the Roe versus Wade decision in 1973, which legalized abortion, invalidated all state laws prohibiting any abortions, and it's primarily a religious-based entity, which is not true, but that's what they would perceive. Not only religious-based, but primarily Catholic. I think that would be the primary view that most people would have, and even within the pro-life movement. Mm-hmm. The reality is, if you study the history of opposition to abortion, what you discover is that the first people that opposed legalized abortion in America was not the pro-life movement or the Catholic Church or any of these religious-based organizations. It was the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam and other community-based civil rights organizations from the 1960s. And we found tons of documentation on this. One of the first people and the most eloquent speaker of the day was Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson in his earlier days was an ardent and outspoken opponent of legal abortion. He was a speaker at National Right to Life conventions. He signed on to a document calling for a constitutional amendment that would prohibit abortion in every circumstance. And we found a lot of quotes from him back in those days. Because let me back up. When we put this thing on the timeline that I mentioned to you earlier, I remember one day talking to Carol, the girl that helped me with all the research on this, and I said, Carol, are we the only people who've ever looked at this and said, it's kind of strange that at the same time that the sterilization boards were being done away with, and at the same time the civil rights movement was picking up steam. Those things happened concurrently, by the way.
Yes, sir.
At that same moment in history, is it also just a cosmic coincidence of some sort that for the first time the U.S. government and all of these organizations like Planned Parenthood have done a 180 on their position on abortion and started calling for the legalization of abortion? I thought, can we be the only ones who ever saw this? And as we continued our research, we found a quote from Jesse Jackson saying the exact same thing, which, as you know, we put in the documentary.
Yes, sir. I definitely wanted to make sure that our listeners got the point that you just talked about, because there's a lot of evidence that you use in the film where a lot of non-white people during the so-called civil rights movement felt that the work of Planned Parenthood and the whole push for birth control and abortions, that they felt this was a direct racist attack on black people, non-white people in this area of the world. Even you quoted C.O.W.S. In the documentary, who was saying the exact same thing that you seem to be doing, that this push for birth control seems to be heaviest on non-white people.
The thing you come up with, Gus, when you research it, it goes beyond just an opinion. This seems to be what's going on. There comes a point at which it's just absolutely unavoidable to make that conclusion. And that's what Jesse Jackson was saying. I don't have the quote right here in front of me, but he said something to the effect, it seems kind of strange to me that at the first time in world history, when the black man starts demanding his fair share of the pie,
right,
all of a sudden these people start calling for the legalization of abortion.
Right.
And you had other people like Eldridge Cleaver and all these other very well-known civil rights activists saying exactly the same thing. That and talking about urban renewal was basically black removal. That's what it really meant.
Right.
And Stokely Carmichael, one of the more radical of the 60s civil rights activists, he was saying the exact same thing. He gave a speech at Howard University, on the campus of Howard University, the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated, saying this very same thing, that these people are trying to push abortion and birth control on us, not because they love us, but because they want to get rid of us.
Right.
Now,
I just wanted to point out really quickly, because you alluded to Margaret Sanger, and someone in the chat room, they said that they've seen interviews with Margaret Sanger and that she was not a racist. She was pro-women. She believed women should have a choice as it relates to having a child and pregnancy. In the documentary, you all have a lot of evidence, and it seems that you all are asserting in the documentary that Margaret Sanger was racist, and she was definitely a eugenicist. She was looking to join her organization, the American Birth Control League, with the American Eugenics Society. Can you share your view on whether or not you feel it would be accurate to say, hey, Margaret Sanger was not a racist. She was just doing this to push her own agenda of women's choice, and making sure that women are able to have more control over giving birth.
Well, anyone, obviously, no one, if someone in your chat room says that,
yes, sir,
your viewers, your listeners have no way to know whether I'm telling the truth or that person's telling the truth. I'd tell them to research it. Margaret Sanger was an avowed racist. She was a member of the American Eugenics Society. We have the membership list from as late as 1956 of the American Eugenics Association. She was a member. We have the documentation of her being a member. She was a friend of Lothrop Stoddard, who wrote the book, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy, that was sold by the Ku Klux Klan. She was tied to the Nazis, whose most people don't understand this, and we talk about this in the documentary. They think that the only targets of the Nazis were the Jews. The reality is that Hitler specifically targeted the blacks in Europe for sterilization and for removal, as he put it. One of Margaret Sanger's best friends was a man named Madison Grant, who was the president of the American Eugenics Society. We found a quote from Adolf Hitler where he said Madison Grant's book is his Bible. Madison Grant wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race, talking about the problems associated with the white race being, as they called, polluted by non-white people. Adolf Hitler said that book was his Bible for eugenics in Nazi Germany. This guy was on the board with Margaret Sanger, American Birth Control League.
But this is just convenience. I'm just playing devil's advocate. This is all just for convenience. She didn't really have the same views. She was just they're staunchly in favor of women's choice and giving women more freedom and power. She didn't share these people's views. Well,
I don't know how you could possibly make that argument if you start researching what she said. Also, if you look in her autobiography, this is one thing that these people conveniently want to just kind of brush over as a non-event. In her autobiography, she talks about a speech she gave in Silver Lake, New Jersey, to the Ku Klux Klan. And she said she found them to be a very interesting group. And at the end of her speech, she was invited to speak, according to her own autobiography, she was invited to speak by 12 other Klan chapters.
Wow.
Now, let me ask you this question, Gus. Would you conclude from that, like I said, these people, these defenders of Sanger and Planned Parenthood, want to just blow that off as, well, it's just an indiscretion. I'm sure she didn't, really ascribe to their views. Would you say to me that if someone gave a speech to the Ku Klux Klan and 12 other chapter leaders of the Klan came up and asked her to speak at their events, would you say that they liked what she said or didn't like what she said?
I would say the evidence strongly suggests that the Klan was in favor of what that person had to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is utterly preposterous to make this argument that the American Birth Control League, which became Planned Parenthood, which was started by Margaret Sanger and run by Margaret Sanger and financed by all her ultra-wealthy white elitists like Clarence Gamble, the Procter & Gamble fortune people, and many, many others, it is utterly preposterous to suggest that these people were not eugenicists and not racist. It's just an out-and-out lie. But again, I would challenge your listeners not to take my word for it. Go study it for themselves.
Okay.
And let me bring up one other thing that I wanted to mention a moment ago. Right after we produced Maafa 21, something happened that is absolutely unbelievable to me. Within just a couple of weeks after we released it, the New York Times was doing an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the United States Supreme Court Justice.
Okay.
It is inarguable that this is the most radically pro-abortion person that's ever sat on the U.S. Supreme Court. This woman believes that the men who wrote Roe versus Wade didn't go far enough. She has literally written that.
Okay.
This is the most pro-abortion person that's ever sat on the U.S. Supreme Court is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's still there right now.
Okay.
I want to read you this quote that came from her. Now, this was an interview she did with the New York Times right after we released Maafa 21.
Okay.
They were talking about all the issues that come before the Supreme Court. When they got around to the abortion issue, they asked her about that and what the future of legalized abortion was, and so, et cetera. I'm going to read you this quote. Quote, frankly, I had thought at the time Roe was decided there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of, unquote. I'm going to ask you another question, Gus. These people that she's saying that they were concerned about, they legalized abortion because they were concerned about the growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. Are you unclear about who that might be?
As I said, I have concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. Anytime I hear people talking about populations that they don't want too many of, I generally assume that they're talking about non-white people.
You don't believe for a moment, do you, that she was talking about wealthy white people?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
So basically, and people need to understand this, from our standpoint, from the standpoint of showing the eugenics history behind the legalization of abortion, I would argue that what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said right here is the smoking gun. She is conceding what I said when we started this interview, that the issue is not women's rights, it's not privacy, it's not reproductive freedom, it's not being pro-choice, it's to control the growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. That's what she's saying. That was in July of 2009, and that woman sits on the U.S. Supreme Court as you and I speak.
Wow. Again, our guest for today's program, Mr. Mark Crutcher. He is the writer, director, and music editor for Maafa 21. I definitely wanted to make sure I got this in because you talked about Margaret Sanger and the ties that she had to very wealthy. You're saying elitists, and I'm saying these people, many of them are avowed racists.
Yes.
Avowed and suspected racists. These people are heavily bankrolled. You, in your documentary, Maafa 21, you cite how the Carnegie Foundation, Rockefellers, Bill Gates, Ted Turner, these people have contributed a lot of money. And for the duration of this campaign back, the American Birth Control League, now Planned Parenthood. Can you talk about the wealth that these people have gotten, both from individuals that I've named, Bill Gates, Ted Turner, the Rockefellers, but also government money that these people have got to carry out these aims that you say the evidence would clearly suggest they're practicing racism?
Well, yeah, the eugenics movement. Again, we talk about this in the documentary, and I think we do a good job of documenting it. It was always the kind of golden child of the ultra wealthy. But these people aren't crusaders. You don't see the ultra wealthy out marching or getting in the streets or doing anything like that. They hire people to do those jobs. And the person that they hired back in the 1940s and 1930s was Margaret Sanger. And that trend just continues up to this day. And these ultra wealthy elitists, you mentioned Bill Gates from Microsoft. He has poured gigantic fortunes into the eugenics movement. Warren Buffett, either the second or third richest man on the planet, has poured billions into the eugenics movement. He gave $5.2 billion at one time into the eugenics movement. Ted Turner, George Soros, you just go down the list. These people have always made sure that the American eugenics movement, and primarily Planned Parenthood, had all the money that they needed. Now, you mentioned government. The U.S. government has given billions, with a B, to Planned Parenthood over the years. We just looked at one of the more recent years for which numbers were available, 2006. In 2006, Planned Parenthood made $60 million in profit. You have to understand, this is a multinational billion-dollar corporation. They made $60 million profit in 2006, and got $347 million just in federal money from the U.S. government.
Wow.
As you and I speak right now, in the current budget, Planned Parenthood receives approximately $1 million every 24 hours in federal dollars alone.
Wow.
I would argue, and I would argue this with anyone, that there is no distinction between giving $1 million a day to Planned Parenthood and giving $1 million a day to the Ku Klux Klan. I challenge anyone to tell me the difference.
No distinction.
Right.
Okay. And based on what evidence? What evidence?
From a racial standpoint is what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
I'm saying, think about it this way, Gus. Let's say for a moment that the Ku Klux Klan, some rich industrialist died and he had no relatives. He didn't even leave his money to his cat. He left his whole fortune to the Ku Klux Klan. Okay. And all of a sudden the Klan had, $10 billion in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing we learned is that they started opening up birth control and abortion clinics. And 85% of them are in black neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Would we be suspicious about what's going on?
I hope so.
Right. Well, why aren't we suspicious about what's going on when Planned Parenthood's doing the exact same thing?
I feel, and that's why I wanted to have you on the program, that's exactly why I said earlier in the program that I believe non-white people are not very informed about this information. And in fact, this walks me right to the question I definitely wanted to make sure that I asked. The information you just shared, the Rockefellers' heavy support of the eugenics and birth control Planned Parenthood movement. In addition to Rockefeller laws that they have put in effect in the New York area that have resulted in a lot of non-white people being incarcerated for nonviolent crimes and a lot of their other work, what would your view be of a non-white person who names their company Rockefeller, given the information that you know about their support of eugenics and Planned Parenthood? What would your view be of a non-white person who names their company after the Rockefellers?
It wouldn't be any lower than it would be if a white person did it. It's
okay.
Obscene. It's obscene. Let me make sure people understand how involved this particular entity. It's not the only one.
Mm.
The Rockefeller Foundation is not the only one.
Mm.
Let's go back to Nazi Germany. We now know through Madison Grant and Lothrop Stoddard, again, you mentioned him earlier, a colleague of Margaret Sanger's on the board of the American Birth Control League. He was actually invited and did, in fact, go and had a conference with Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, the man who ran the final solution or the death camps in Germany.
Mm.
Stoddard actually sat with him for a day and discussed the issue of eugenics. Now, one of the most fascinating things that we discovered, and this was something that I didn't know, and it was not that hard to find out. I feel kind of stupid that I didn't know it. When the Nazis took over, they created their own eugenics entity that would eventually be the one in control of the concentration camps and the elimination of all the non-whites and the Jews from Europe.
Mm.
That organization that they created was called the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Wow.
The United States Rockefeller Foundation funded the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany, where the Nazis' plans were made for the concentration camps.
Mm.
One of the people who ran the organization was a guy named Ernst Rudin. He ran the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. He was also a writer for Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League's newsletter, Birth Control Review. He was a writer for them, and he was running the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. So the links between some of these organizations, in particular the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, and the Nazis and the eugenics movement in America are long established and continue to this day. Let me give you one of the most chilling things we uncovered that It's still almost unbelievable, but we've been able to verify that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And when the World War II was over, it was revealed that the company which had sold the gas to the Nazis was a company named IG Farben. They sold the gas that the Nazis used in their gas chambers.
Mm-hmm.
When IG Farben was investigated, it was then discovered that not only did they sell the gas to the Nazis, but that they actually helped the Nazis design the gas chambers so that they could sell them the gas.
Wow.
It was IG Farben engineers who helped do it.
Mm.
Well, IG Farben then became closely linked with the German Holocaust, naturally, which meant that this company, which was a very old, a very large pharmaceutical and chemical company, was probably going to go out of business. The way they solved the problem was they changed the name of the company. IG Farben changed its name to HERT, Hoescht AG, HERT Incorporated. And they survived. As a matter of fact, they're a pharmaceutical giant today with subsidiaries all over the world, including the United States. Their headquarters in the United States is in New Jersey. So they did survive. That's IG Farben. Now, one of their subsidiaries is a French company called C.O.W.S. C.O.W.S. is the company that developed the abortion pill RU486. So I want you to think about this for a minute. The same company that developed the chemical that was used in the Nazi death camps, that same company today is the one that developed the chemical that's used in American abortion clinics.
Wow.
Same exact company. Now, we were talking about the Rockefellers.
Yes, sir.
When the information about IG Farben became known at the end of World War II, it was also revealed that one of their business partners was John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. In fact, John Rockefeller and Standard Oil formed a separate company with IG Farben. It was called Standard IG Farben, for Standard Oil and IG Farben of Germany. They were closely linked together. Rockefeller at that same time was pouring money into the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. If we go forward to the RU486 deal, the abortion pill, that was developed by the same company as IG Farben, when RU486 was approved during the Clinton administration for sale in the United States, the problem they had was they couldn't find a manufacturer, anyone that would actually manufacture it for sale in the United States. So they went on an 8-year search, and they finally found a company in China. The RU486 that's sold in the United States today is actually made in China. It's made by a pharmaceutical company over there that's partially owned by the Chinese government. They agreed to help produce the abortion pill after the Rockefeller Foundation gave them a large grant to offset some of their startup cost. So this thing is so tied together. When you start researching it, this documentary is 2 hours long.
Yes, sir.
I'm telling you something, Gus, it could have been 20 hours long. If you see all the stuff that we had to leave out just in the sake of brevity.
Yes, sir.
It is unbelievable. We could have done a 6-hour documentary just on the ties between the American Eugenics movement and American Birth Control League and Planned Parenthood and the Nazis. We could have done a 6-hour DVD just on that.
Wow. I just want to point out, someone in the chat room is saying that they don't think non-white people are ignorant about this information. I strongly disagree. And you said for you, if it was a white person or a non-white person who named their company after the Rockefellers as though that was something to be proud of, that would be obscene. I just want to point out for the non-white folks who are listening, we one of a celebrated non-white person has named their company after the Rockefellers. I think that points to an incredible amount of confusion amongst non-white people who are just not very informed about different things that white people have done to practice racism, especially the Rockefellers. Just from the information you share, there seems to be a ton of information that these people have done a lot to practice racism and to aid others in practicing racism, white supremacy. I found that very interesting because I noted in the documentary that you had people who did research to help you get all this information about Lathrop Stoddard and just digging through the archives to get all this wonderful information. What was the budget for Maafa 21?
Well, believe it or not, we didn't keep up with it as we went along. We did it as we could afford to do it. We are, of course, we just survive off donations, and you'd be amazed at how little the budget was.
Really?
Oh, yes, because I have a young lady that works for me that she and I did all the research.
Okay.
And she worked on it full time, and I worked on it probably a third of my time for that 3.5 years. And a lot of it we already had. A lot of the research we already had gathered up over the years we've been in the pro-life movement. But actually, we had to do this. You know, there's no saying, Gus, poor people have poor people's ways. Well, we had to have poor people's ways. We don't have a budget where I can go out and hire $100,000 a year researchers, a team of them to sit and go through all this stuff. But I would put our research up against any research organization that did have that sort of budget.
Okay.
I think we found stuff that was just, absolutely unbelievable in my view. For example, a guy that I haven't found anybody else yet that has even ever heard of the guy. A guy named Eugene Fisher. Very interesting character. He worked at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, and he had written a lot of things. He had written that blacks were a subhuman form of the species that should only be allowed to survive as long as they are of use to the white race. So I think we can conclude from this that he was a racist. Now, some of Margaret Sanger's buddies may not conclude that from that statement, but nonetheless, you and I think, would. Eugene Fisher actually had been he was a German. He had been involved in concentration camps in southeastern Africa 20 years before the Nazis took over. The Nazis didn't invent the concentration camps. Eugene Fisher had already been running some in Africa. And the similarities to what we now know to be the concentration camps in Germany, the similarities between those and the ones that Eugene Fisher ran in Africa are amazing. Blacks were rounded up, brought to these camps. Immediately upon arriving, they would be judged as to whether they were healthy enough to work. If they were, they were sent in one direction. If they weren't healthy enough to work, they were executed. And some of them were held to be used in some really ghastly medical experiments. This is exactly what you saw, of course, 20 years down the road with the with the Nazis. Eugene Fisher was eventually put in charge by Hitler of the program to eliminate all blacks from countries that came under the control of the Germans. As they took over a country, one of the things they wanted to do was to get rid of all the blacks in that country. And Eugene Fisher was the guy put in control of that. A couple of years after that, after he was actually put in charge of that project with the Nazis, Margaret Sanger had an international conference on birth control, and she invited Eugene Fisher to be one of her speakers. Now, does that mean she believed everything Eugene Fisher said? I don't know. But why would you have him as a speaker? Gus, if you and I were going to put on a conference somewhere, would we invite David Duke to speak?
I would be very interested in having him come on the program, not because I agree with his views, but just because I would love the opportunity to have non-white people hear how white people like Mr. Eugene Fisher, David Duke, I think it's very important that non-white people listen to what these people are saying so that we get an accurate understanding of how powerful white people who practice racism, what they think and what they plan to do. So I would want to listen to him, not because I agree, just because I would want to be informed about my enemy.
But you would not have him as a speaker at one of your conferences?
If I was having a conference and any white person who practices racism wanted to come and share their plan for how they're going about practicing racism and how they wanted to mistreat or how they perceive non-white people, I would be more than willing to have them there, not because I agree, but because I think it's important that non-white people hear what their enemy thinks about them. So, yes, I would have him, not because I agree, just because I think that's important to hear these folks.
But you would confront him.
I would ask questions. I would ask a lot of questions.
What I'm telling you is that at this International Birth Control Conference, he was there as a speaker for the issue of birth control and abortion.
Right.
And he was invited by Margaret Sanger.
Yes, sir.
She was the chairperson of this conference.
Mm. And
Eugene Fisher was a speaker. Now, if you had, let's say that you learned, for example, that let's say George Bush was running for president again, could run for president again. Let's say he was running, and it was discovered that at one point he had a conference, and the point of the conference was to advance the issue, the white supremacy.
Okay.
And he had David Duke as a speaker.
Okay.
Would that be relevant to you?
Very.
That's exactly what happened here.
Very.
This was an international conference on birth control, eugenics, and abortion. Many of the other panelists members of this team that put this thing together with Margaret Sanger were co-members with her in the American Eugenics Society, and they invite Eugene Fisher as one of their speakers. What does that tell you?
I suspect these people could have a common agenda in practicing racism, white supremacy, but I could be incorrect.
You'd bet your house on it. And you'd have to find somebody other than me to bet with, because I'm
again, Mr. Mark Crutcher, the founder and president of Life Dynamics Incorporated. I want to get some questions because the people did call in, so I want to take some questions as well. Okay. I had a few questions. If we could, I want to see if we can get through about 5 to 8 questions before I take callers. If you could make your answer as concise as possible. I don't want to lose information, but I want to try and get as many in as possible.
You may have noticed that's not one of my strong suits.
Oh, yeah. The information is important, though, and that's why I'm glad you were able to share some of your time with us.
Well, this thing is so complicated. I'm sometimes reminded of that point in the 1976 presidential debate when someone asked Jimmy Carter if he was elected president, how he would solve the Middle East crisis, and could he please limit his answer to 1 minute and 30 seconds. Well, I don't know if you can do that in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Exactly.
If it's so simple you can do it in 1 minute and 30 seconds, we should have already done it.
Exactly.
But anyway, go ahead.
Were any of the non-white people that were in this film, were any of them compensated for their time?
No, sir.
Okay.
Nobody was paid.
Okay. To your knowledge, I don't know if you have research on this, but to your knowledge, how have the black people who have seen this work, how have they responded? Have they, to your knowledge, have they changed their view on abortion and decided that this is something that they're going to oppose? Have they contributed to your foundation? Just how have black people responded to seeing this?
We have had an enormous positive response to this. Actually, the DVD has been shown in Congress twice. And I can't reveal a name, but I can tell you that one of the chiefs of staff for a member of the Congressional Black Caucus told us that when she went just to keep an eye on us to see what we were up to, but that when she left, she told us, she said, my whole life has been changed.
Wow.
She said, I've been supporting something I knew nothing about. And she is now adamantly opposed to abortion.
Wow.
Now, that's just one anecdotal story, and obviously this thing is being shown. Last week, for example, it was shown in last month, it was shown in a theater that was rented by a church in Maryland, and 650 African Americans went. I can't tell you what all those people thought when they left. All I can tell you is that the response that we have received so far has been nothing short of unbelievable. When we originally produced the first DVD, we sent it to the duplicator to start distributing these DVDs. I was able to get a donor to help us out, and we were able to produce 10,000 DVDs to start with. And I remember telling him, he said, well, how long will this get you through? And I said, this will get us through at least 2 and maybe 3 years. That was in July. We're already out.
Wow.
So the response to this thing has been absolutely unbelievable because it's opening people's eyes. And, you know, something I want to have to take issue with something you said earlier. You said that a lot of non-white people don't know these things. The number one response I've gotten from, particularly from African Americans, is that a lot of this stuff they knew, but they had never connected all the dots. They had never put it in context. They might have known individual things. Now, they'll tell me, they said, there's a lot of stuff in here that we never heard of. But a lot of it we just never put it into context and never saw it in a connecting the dots formula, say going from the end of slavery right up to today, and seeing how the eugenics thing controls this, has controlled this from day one. Because when you first tell people that the argument that you're making is that there's a connection between the failure of colonization and the legalization of abortion, events that took place 150 years apart, when you try to tell people there's a connection between that, a lot of times they naturally look at you like you lost your mind. And I've had many people that have told me, and I'm looking back on it now, thinking back on it, I think every person that said this to me has been black, but has told me that I heard this theory of what your DVD was about, and I watched it just to basically be able to ridicule it and chide it and so forth. But I came to see that it makes sense, and that's been one of the most rewarding types of comments that we've received.
I would just my comment would be that if individuals do not have context for information, the name of this program, Context of White Supremacy, context is integral to understanding, and you said the non-white people that they did not have context for the anecdotes that they did have, and that a lot of them did say that a significant amount of the information they were not familiar with. I strongly think that most non-white people are just very uninformed about this, and certainly, as you said, do not have a context to put this in, to understand that this is happening this is supposed to happen within a system of white supremacy. You're supposed to see this sort of thing all the time. I was very curious to know, what would you tell, because I think a lot of non-white people, they view abortion as something that helps to solve their problems. If I get pregnant and I'm a non-white person or a white person, and I don't have resources to take care of this child, this is something that is really helpful. I don't want to be a single mom struggling trying to go to school and work a job and being mistreated. I mean, wow, if I'm not supporting abortion, this is going to take something out of my hands that helps me solve problems. What would you tell non-white people in response?
Well, same thing I tell any white person. Then you're a very poor problem solver. If the solution to your problems is to kill your own children, then let me ask you why you wouldn't. Let's say that you have 2 or 3 children already born, and you lose your job, and you're not able to find another job, and finances get really bad. Why wouldn't you kill one of them? If you're such a poor problem solver that you think you cannot solve problems without having the freedom to kill your own child, you're not going to make it in life anyway.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the things I think we need to, and we're kind of drifting off away from the racial issue here, but into the issue of the abortion thing, one of the things that I think people need to understand is, again, it goes back to this issue of how we've been sold a bill of goods, and we've bought into so many urban legends as it regards this particular issue, And I say that it was not done to advance the cause of women. It was done to as a tool of eugenics, and I think we've made that case pretty airtight. But something that kind of confirms this, if you will research the history of feminism in America, one of the most interesting things you find is the early feminists in this country, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Virginia Woodhull, Evelyn Judge, who wrote the original Equal Rights Amendment, you just go on down the line, these women were all, 100% of them, staunchly opposed to abortion, to the legalization of abortion, because they recognized the history of legalized abortion, wherever it's been tried, the result of that has been the liberation of sexually irresponsible and sexually predatory males. They are the ones who take advantage of abortion. And it is women, powerful women don't kill their babies. I remember one of these early feminists I read one time making that statement. You know, if we want to see women be powerful, why do we focus in on this issue of them having the ability to kill their babies? Powerful women don't kill their babies for anybody or for any reason. And but again, if you're going to sell abortion as something that profits women, you've got to ignore those things. And to me, it kind of reaffirms what I said earlier, that this thing is not about women's rights or reproductive freedom. It was about eugenics. And even if you don't buy into that, if you will just then start looking at the fact that all the early feminists opposed legalization of abortion, and the reasons that they opposed it was that they saw that it enslaves women. It's simply another way for sexually irresponsible and sexually predatory males to exploit women in a responsibility-free environment. Then that takes away the argument that this was done for the benefit of women. Well, once you take that away, then what was it done for? Well, then you're back to the eugenics issue.
I wanted to go back. I thought that was very important. You said an individual who decides this will solve my problems. If I go get an abortion, this will solve my problem of not being able to take care of my offspring. You said, well, I would say you are a poor problem solver. And I have concluded that in a system of white supremacy, non-white people are conditioned to be poor problem solvers. That's a big part of our victimization. Evidence Exhibit A, we have not solved the problem of racism, white supremacy. If a non-white person is a poor problem solver, and they say, yes, I'm a poor problem solver, I need abortion to, I'm just not very good at working this thing out, what would you say to that person?
Well, again, as a society, that's the very reason you have to have laws against abortion. That's the very reason you have to have, just like it's the very reason you have to have laws against them killing their 5-year-old. Because that person that is the bad problem solver that you describe, if there's not constraints put on that person through the law, they're liable to do anything. So again, if we would not allow that person who is a bad problem solver to kill their 5-year-old to solve their financial problems, why would we allow them to kill their unborn child?
Do you think if these people are poor problem solvers, are you saying that the people that view abortion as a means to solving their problems, if they get pregnant and it's not planned, they can't take care of that child, that this person is a poor problem solver?
No, I'm saying if that's their attitude.
Oh, right, okay.
But understand something. Years ago, there was a really interesting experiment done. I think it was done, don't quote me on this because I'm not sure, but I recall it being done by the University of Michigan.
Okay.
In the math department, they went out and gave, they divided up, this is an advanced math, a group of advanced math students at the University of Michigan. They divided them up by their GPAs into two groups that had a cumulative GPAs of exactly the same amount, so that you had two groups of math students, advanced math students, who were equally intelligent. This experiment was ostensibly being done by the math department, when in reality it was being done by the psychology department, and the students didn't know that. What they did is they had the math professor come up with an extraordinarily complicated mathematical problem to solve. And they gave the same problem to both groups of students. And they said, your options in group number A, they said, there is a solution to this problem, and you must either come back to us with the solution, or tell us that you couldn't solve the problem.
Okay.
In Group B, they told them something different. They told them, we're not going to tell you there's a solution to this problem. You have to come back and tell us whether there is a solution or there is not a solution. Okay. And your statement that there is not a solution is a legitimate response to the problem, okay?
Okay.
In the first group, something like 92% of those students got the right answer. But in the second group, only about 27% got the right answer. That's because they were conditioned up front to believe that they couldn't solve that problem, that not solving that problem was an acceptable answer. And it is human nature. It's your nature. It's my nature. It's all of our natures that we take the easy way out. And when you tell somebody that the solution to your problem may be killing your child, that may be what they do. But if you tell them that's not an answer, in most cases, they will find a solution to that problem. I mean, remember, it's not like we're operating in a vacuum here. Prior to 1973, almost every state in this union prohibited abortions. And you know what? Women figured out ways to solve their problems. I have more confidence in the female population than to believe that most of them are such pathetic problem solvers that they have to resort to killing their own child.
Wow. Again, founder and president of Life Dynamics Incorporated, Mr. Mark Crutcher. Folks that called in, hang tight. I have 3 questions, and I'm going to start taking calls. You are the writer of Maafa 21. What portions of this documentary did you actually write, Mr. Crutcher?
I wrote it all. I wrote the script.
Okay, so the people that are speaking in the film, you wrote what they're saying, like.
Oh no. I'm saying I wrote the script for the film. We're going to talk about this here and this here and this here.
Okay.
Some of these people, ask questions, and we, tell them what we found, or we let them see some of our research or whatever. But no, they had their own opinions and stuff.
Okay, so none of the people that we're seeing on the film, you did not write what they're saying, Johnny Hunt.
Except for mine.
Okay.
No, I wrote my own script, obviously.
Okay, gotcha. So everybody else that we're seeing in the film, they're saying they came up with the things that they're saying on their own. Again, some of them read research that we provided them. Okay. But, I think you can tell they're not reading off a teleprompter. Okay, gotcha.
If that's what we were going to do, we could have made it look a lot slicker by putting it all on the teleprompter.
I gotcha. Okay. What do you tell? I feel like this film, and I could be incorrect, I feel like this film, the target audience is black people. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we want to educate the African-American community, but there has been a strong need within the pro-life movement. I would have done this video. If you had told me up front, no black person's ever going to watch this video, I don't know how you'd have known that, but let's just say you did.
Right.
I would have still done it. Because people in the pro-life movement very often do not understand very much about the history of the movement, or how, if you say to them, how did abortion become legal, a lot of them will regurgitate what they hear from the main culture. All this was about women's rights versus babies' rights, and we've pitted women against their babies now for the last 36 years, and they'll say things like that. They don't understand. The white people that dominate the pro-life movement, they don't understand that eugenics was the motivation behind it.
Wow. So I'm just curious, do you think the typical white person who views Maafa 21, do you think this would motivate them to rethink their views on abortion and, I guess ideally for your purpose, oppose abortion in this area of the world?
We've already seen that.
White people have viewed this film and...
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something that's very interesting. When we did the initial showing of Maafa 21 here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we invited about 75 people to come see it. We set up. We had a premiere or whatever you want to call it.
Mm.
The audience was probably half black and half white, and some of the responses were truly amazing. The most interesting of which, and we've seen this repeated in other places, the most interesting response we got that first night was that most of just real anger was from the white people that were there. We've seen this in a couple of other places where Maafa has been shown to primarily white audiences or to mixed audiences. There are a lot of white people in this country who are very angry about some of these issues. I think mainly because, and this is what this one woman, I remember this one particular woman who was here the night we showed the thing for the first time, and she was just seething at the end of this thing. And she said, I am so damn angry over this. She said, I never knew any of this stuff. She said, I've been in the pro-life movement 20 years. I never knew any of this. And she said, this makes me so damn angry. And she said, because this has been done by people who look like me.
Mm.
And, I think it's a little bit like, do you have children?
No, sir.
Okay, well, it's kind of like if, obviously you had parents.
Obviously.
Right. When you were a young man, had you gone out and done something illegal or stupid, gotten picked up by the police, put in jail, whatever, your father would have been much more angry about that than if the kid next door to you did it. Because he's associated with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen this. This has been one of the most unexpected things that we've seen as a result of Maafa 21 is this level of anger by not a large percentage, but by a percentage of the whites that have watched it. That's been one of the more surprising things.
Very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and see if we can get some callers in, because quite a few folks have questions. Last four digits, 4404, 4404. Did you have a question for Mr. Crutcher? Okay. Person might just be listening. No problem. If you're just listening, no problem. Last four digits, 9313. Last four digits, 9313. Did you have a question for Mr. Crutcher?
Yes. What's with this last four digits? No, it's okay.
You mean your name's not 9313?
Usually he does like the area code or something. But anyway, I had a thought on this IG Farben. When you said IG Farben, I immediately thought of MK Ultra. Does that click with you? Because they were the ones that were pushing this chemical body, that you can control the body due to the chemical makeup.
That doesn't sound familiar to me at all, sir.
Oh, wow, that's deep. Well, yeah, anyway, they were definitely a part of that. It was the IG Farben body that the MK Ultra, that's what they were trying to control. Well, anyway, they found out that you can't control the body through the chemical makeup because we're more than just chemicals.
Right. Well, IG Farben been involved in lots of things, so.
Yeah, they're pretty, they're pretty deep. And I had a question, as far as the black organizations that are tied in with this Planned Parenthood and this Margaret Sanger philosophy, have you already spoken on that, or is it in the movie? I haven't seen the movie. Are there a lot of black organizations that are taking this philosophy and running with it?
Absolutely. Okay. That's one of the sad realities, and we talk about that extensively in the documentary. You have to remember that in this sense, black people are no different than white people. And that is that when people are corrupt, they don't care what color the victim's skin color is. They're just corrupt. And so this is one of the things that I have taken issue with some of my white friends who will look at things like Jesse Jackson's sellout. Jesse Jackson was hardcore opposed to abortion. He understood all this eugenics stuff. He'd spoken about it. He'd researched it. But when he decided he wanted to run for president, he literally decided overnight that the greatest civil rights issue of our time was a woman's right to choose. He said that. And it's tempting for white people to look at that and say, see, black people aren't even loyal to their own people. They'll sell their own people out if there's enough political power in it or financial motivation or whatever it is. And that's true, and it makes them no different than white people in that regard. For example, in the case of Bernie Madoff, this guy that ran this large Ponzi scheme where he bilked people out of billions of dollars, and he's now in prison, right? I'll bet that if we went and looked at the people that he bilked money out of, I bet most of them were white. But no one is saying that that's a reflection on the white race, that a white man bilked a bunch of white people out of money. Nobody is saying that's a reflection on the white race, but we tend to do that in the case of non-white races. The minute you have one of them that sells out for whatever corrupt reason he sells out, we let that be a reflection on that whole race. And we've got to get beyond that because that's not realistic.
I just want to, my comment before I go to the next caller, so you can be prepared. Last four digits, 5808. You are next up, so you can be prepared. I did want to comment. I do not think Jesse Jackson is just like a white person who, quote-unquote, sells out to run for president or other political gain. Context of white supremacy, non-white people are at a decided disadvantage in any area of people activity, and frequently it will be in their best interest if they want to succeed to do things that will harm other non-white people that are not in the best interest of non-white people on the whole. That is the dynamic created by racism, white supremacy. So I don't think if a non-white person, if they, quote-unquote, sell out, I do not think that is the same as a white person because of the power dynamic created by racism, white supremacy.
Well, that's where you and I are going to have to disagree, because if Jesse Jackson knows, and he does know, that the legalization of abortion was done in order to wipe out his race of people, and yet he then comes along and says, oh, I'm going to support legalized abortion because I want to be president, and I need the money that comes from the abortion lobby, which by that point had owned his political party, I don't have anything, I don't know of a defense you can make for that guy.
Well, we have agreement that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, where white people dominate worldwide all areas of people activity.
Sure.
Is it possible for a white person or a group of white people to compensate a non-white person to say what they want that non-white person to say, or to do what they want that non-white person to do, even supporting racism, white supremacy in an explicit manner? Is it possible for that to happen?
Sure.
Okay. I think that is important. But
that's not a defense for the person who does it. It's like me saying I could go stand on the street corner and offer to sell people drugs.
Mm.
Just because I'm there offering it, that doesn't make a defense for the person who buys it.
Well, I didn't use the term defense. I think it is very important to keep in mind the people who are most responsible and most to blame are the white people who practice racism, white supremacy. So if I was going to make a gripe about Mr. Jesse Jackson and him flip-flopping overnight on an issue or what have you, I wouldn't be fussing with him. I would be fussing with the white people because they are most to blame for this. I'm sure he was looking for funding from white people to make his run for president in 1984. I would be fussing at those white people. They are much more to blame than Reverend Jesse Jackson. They are responsible for things being this way in the first place, where a non-white person, in order to try to do something constructive, they would have to support racism.
I might agree with you if we characterize it just as you did, as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, I'll compromise on some issues, there are issues I'd compromise on. There are issues that you'd compromise on.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the wholesale eradication, the extermination of your entire race of people, that's where you have to draw the line. That's where a person of principle would draw the line and say, no. I don't care if I have to, be a garbage man for the rest of my life versus being president. I will not compromise my principles on that. And so it'd be somewhat similar to, let's say, I, as someone who's been involved in the pro-life movement for 30 years, decided to run for politics and run for some political office. And in order to do so, I changed my position on abortion just to gain financial favor or political power or whatever. There's no defense for me at that point. It's one thing to say I might change on, some economic issue or even some other social issue that's not of this gravity. But each of us has to have something inside of us that says there are certain issues that are so important to me that I will not compromise on those things. And if you're the kind of person who says, I will compromise even when it means the wholesale eradication of my entire race of people, there's no defense for that person.
Okay. 5808, last four digits, 5808, you are live.
Hello, greetings, Gus.
Greetings.
And greetings, guest.
Hello.
Yes, hi. So I have been able to view Maafa 21 on 2 different occasions. And I've also visited your website, and I thought that the documentary was well done and very informative. My question for you is, why are you anti-abortion, like specifically you?
Why am I opposed to abortion? Is that what you're asking?
That's my question.
Okay. Well, I'm not one of these...
A short answer.
Okay. I'm not one of these people that had a road to Damascus conversion on abortion at some point in my life. It was always a no-brainer to me. If you believe that the unborn child is a living human being, then you can't kill them. They're entitled to the same protections as every other living human being. And that's the reason that I'm opposed to abortion, because biologically, you can't argue that they're not living human beings. There's no logical argument against that position. And so when I look at that, like I say, it's a no-brainer. I couldn't justify taking the life of an unborn child any more than I could take the life of a born child. I don't see any distinction between the two.
0545
Is she gone?
Oh, I still got her. I wanted to try and get in as many callers as possible. 0545.
Good evening.
No speakerphone. Please, no speakerphone, please.
I'm not on a speakerphone. Does it sound like it?
I thought it was, but I can hear you. You're fine.
Okay, very good. I wanted to ask your guest if he could define political poonerology. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. The caller at 0545, we can hear you. Okay. I think we lost her.
I didn't understand the question. Did you understand it?
I did not understand the question either. I could hear her, but I really couldn't make out what she was saying.
I didn't understand the word she was saying. That's why it may be a word I don't know. So.
Yeah. I maybe she'll call back and be a little clearer. But yeah, I couldn't understand it either. Sorry. Just call us back if you would like to ask your question. Caller at last four digits, 6051. 6051. You're live.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Mr. Crutcher, and good afternoon, Gus.
Hello.
Mr. Crutcher, are you I did hear you say that you were opposed to the eradication of black people through the means of terminating pregnancies unnaturally.
Well, I'm opposed to the eradication of black people by any means, but
okay.
That would just be one of
them. Thank you for that. Excellent. Okay. Now, if black people...
was that not clear to you?
Well, I guess I wanted it to be restated, and I thank you for making it clear to me. Thank you. Okay. So now that that's clear to me, would you also be opposed to the eradication of black people by means of them not producing any offspring at all because they do not have, or very few, because they do not have the means to support that offspring appropriately? We've
already covered that.
I'm sorry if I missed that. Okay.
I don't believe if you can tell me that it would be acceptable for someone to kill their 3-year-old because they couldn't provide for that 3-year-old appropriately, then I would say, okay, then it's okay for them to kill their unborn child. I don't apply any distinction between a child in the womb and a child that has exited the womb. It's just a matter of location. So,
sir, I didn't. Sir, I did understand that. That wasn't the nature of my question. I think what I heard the host ask was, do you have a solution? And I could be incorrect, so I'll just pose it as my question. Do you have a solution as to how we can? I am not offering as a solution termination of pregnancy. I agree with you. I actually agree with you that it should not be done. Okay. That having been said, now that we agree that that should not be done, what is the solution for us to be able to produce offspring? What is the solution that you offer to us as to how to produce offspring and support them adequately?
Okay. First off, let's make sure we get our terms right. I'm not opposed to termination of pregnancy. I'm opposed to the termination of other human beings. And when you say termination of pregnancy, that's a term that's used by the other side to sugarcoat what is in reality the termination of another human being. Now, having said that, let me make a point that something we discovered. In the 1960s, and by the way, this is not a partisan issue. As you know, the Republicans are attacked more in our documentary than the Democrats are. The tapes we have of Richard Nixon are absolutely pornographic, in my view. But him saying that if the American people ever stand for the legalization of abortion, it'll only be because they know it'll get rid of all the little black bastards. We've got Richard Nixon on tape in the DVD saying that. But you have to also understand that there's a problem when you start talking about saying that we're going to do this for economic reasons. The problem is that once you say that, that's the direction the government goes in. And so instead of saying that we will create an environment in which people aren't poverty-riddled, we'll allow them to kill their babies. And we found quotes, for example, in the 1960s from President Johnson, President Eisenhower, both saying that they supported birth control and abortion in the ghettos because, now listen to this, $5...
No, sir, you know what? This is exactly what you did with the host. He asked you for your solution, and you simply restated the problem.
No,
and each time you restate the problem, you simply say you shouldn't terminate lives that are in the womb. You shouldn't do that for any reason. We ask for a solution, alternative solution, and you simply say, well, no, but you still shouldn't terminate lives while they're in the womb because you still haven't answered the question. What is your solution for us to produce offspring and support them adequately? Please don't answer it by saying we shouldn't terminate the lives in the womb. We've got that. We understand that. That's your position. Now, please answer the question. How do we produce offspring that we can support adequately?
Okay, are you through?
Yes, sir, I am.
I'm not going to speak again until you tell me you can keep your mouth shut for me to answer the question. Is that a deal?
Will you promise to answer the question and not restate the problem?
I was in the process of answering the question when you interrupted.
I will keep my mouth shut. Let me see if you can do it this time.
I was saying to you that when we found these quotes from the government, from 2 different presidents who said, if we will put $5 into birth control in the urban community, that's better than putting $100 into that same community and economic development. And what I was about to say to you before you rudely interrupted was this. The solution to these problems, which we will never take as long as we see abortion as the solution, the solution to these problems is for the government to, instead of paying for abortions and pushing birth control in the minority community, is to start doing the things that will create economic growth and economic development in those communities so that they don't feel like their only solution to their economic problems is to butcher their children. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay, now specifically, how would that be done? And thank you for answering. Thank you. You surprised me. Now, specifically, how would that be done?
I mean, the same ways that we put economic development into white communities, we can put it into black communities. And I'm telling you, go ahead. I don't mean to be talking.
No, I wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't want to be discourteous again. So go ahead.
I'm just telling you that we don't do that. And the reason we don't do that, I am convinced the U.S. government looks out here and says, look, if these people are willing to have abortions at 5 times the rate of white people, we don't need to put money into economic development in their communities. They're not demanding that we do it. They're happy to have abortion and birth control. So why would we? And I'm telling you, when people stand up and say, killing our children is not a solution for our problems, I want to have better solutions, then I think we will get better solutions. But it's just like when you're raising kids. I have a 19-year-old daughter. She has never once done more than I expected her to do. That's the nature of human beings. We do what's expected of us. And when the government knows that they don't, and that statement, that's one of the most important statements you can ever hear, is those statements by Lyndon Johnson and Dwight Eisenhower saying that we need to put birth control and abortion, dollars in birth control and abortions so that we don't have to put money into economic development. That's where we are today.
Okay, now I agree with you. Was there mistreatment of black people and lack of adequate resources for their offspring before abortion was ever legalized?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So therefore, why would we believe that the resources would pop up all of a sudden because abortion became illegal again when they weren't available before abortion was legal?
If you don't think that the attitudes and the views of the majority community in this country are different now than they were in the 1940s, then you wouldn't believe that. But I'm telling you that they are. And what I'm telling you is that as long as we see abortion as the solution to these problems, I mean, you might as well buy into the Freakonomics thing, right? You familiar with that? These 2 guys.
No, I'm not. But I think you said that you agreed that we still exist in a system of white supremacy, and I think that's what we existed under 40 years ago. So I know that I've taken more than my fair share of resources on my correct.
But wait a minute, what you're buying into the Freakonomics theory. These 2 guys from Chicago.
I don't know what that is, but I do know that somebody else should probably have a chance to talk. So thank you for being a guest on his show.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone called in at last 4 digits 9845. 9845. You're live.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I like some of the things you are saying, Mark. I really like. If it wasn't for your voice, I would think you were black. I do take issue with one thing.
Okay.
For the life of me, how do you think you would ever be pro-life and disrespect a black woman? You don't talk to them like that. If you're very passionate about what you're trying to say, and you hear a question that is passionate. What you do is you answer that question, because anytime you have a black woman trying to get answers, trying to seek, what you do is everything in your power to make sure she gets it without disrespecting the passion that she has. And I think you ought to apologize to her for that.
Well,
Thank
first
you.
off, I was at the point of answering her question when she interrupted. And I assume that you can see from the answer that I gave that I picked up right where I left off, and then she was satisfied. It has nothing to do with respect or disrespect. It has to do with the fact that I was the one who was disrespected, if anyone was. I was answering her question, and she interrupted to tell me I wasn't answering her question, and when I picked up right where I left off, she was satisfied.
I just wanted to check. 619, were you satisfied with his answer? You're on the line, 619.
Can you hear me?
Yep. We got you. Were you satisfied with his answer?
No, I was not, because I didn't get any specifics. Simply saying, oh, we have to provide resources. We've been hearing that since for the last 50 years. What's new? No, I wasn't satisfied.
Oh.
Well, are you expecting me to have a solution to all the world's economic problems?
Well, to me, it sounds as if you said it was something quite doable. You said, hey, well, exactly the same way that we do it for white people.
Right.
So if you know how it's done for white people, you know, you should be able to tell us what it is that we need to be given. I don't hear you offering any information that will solve the problem. And if you don't have any information that's going to solve the problem, why are you taking up our time?
Ma'am, I don't pretend to have information to solve all the world's economic problems. I never pretend to do that. I'm not taking up your time. You've chosen to be here. I came on here to answer questions about the role of eugenics in the abortion issue. That's it.
Did you not expect an audience, sir?
Well, sure I did.
And it was in the audience you expected was what would be for people who wanted to have solutions to the problem of the murdering of, as you see it, black children. Did you not expect?
Right.
Okay. And if that problem solution is adequate resources, then shouldn't you have expected or shouldn't you have been prepared to offer that solution to that audience?
No, because you're going on a false premise. The premise is that there is some sort of, we have to have a solution, an economic solution, before we can tell people you can't kill your children. That's untrue. Again, I have made it clear, I don't draw a distinction between an unborn child and a born child. And if I came on here and said, I don't think black people or white people or any other colored people should be allowed to kill their 3-year-olds to solve their economic problems, you wouldn't then come back to me and say, well, then what's the solution to their economic problems? You wouldn't say that to me. You would agree with me that they shouldn't be allowed to kill those children. And what I'm saying is the pro-life position is there's no distinction between that 3-year-old and that unborn child.
Right. Okay. Then we need to get back to the more general assumption that I thought was shared, which is that you are opposed to the eradication of black people for any reason. One being the killing of children in the womb, and the other for any other reason, including the lack of procreation because they cannot support their children. So we're not, as we said before, we're not going to kill unborn children. Now, we want to make sure that they get born and are supported. And we shouldn't be producing them if we can't support them. So now you know this stuff, right? You've been speaking and writing and researching about this stuff. So you don't want us to be eradicated, but you don't, and we agree that we shouldn't kill our unborn children. So now, how do we have the resources so that we can procreate and support our offspring? You should know that to me before you come on before this audience.
That wasn't the subject of this conversation. The subject of this conversation was the role of eugenics in the legalization of abortion. I'm not coming on here saying I have a solution to all the world's social problems. I don't have to have a solution to all the world's social problems to say that it's wrong for someone to kill their unborn child.
Okay. Okay, so you don't have any solution to solving the problem of the system of racism, white supremacy. Is that correct?
What is that?
I'm sorry, you broke up for me.
I'm hearing something.
Was that?
Oh, you're fine, Mr. Crutcher. That was yeah. Don't worry about it. You're fine.
Okay. No, I'm just saying. You can put 100 people in a room and they'll tell you 100 different solutions or quote unquote solutions to economic issues that impact any community. What I'm trying to say to you is that I don't have to have a solution to all these economic problems in order to contend that it's wrong to execute children to solve those economic problems. And you wouldn't expect me to do that if I was talking about 3-year-olds. You only expect me to do that when I'm talking about the unborn.
I would. Oh, sir, I would. If I expect, if you want to come to me and tell me how it is that we should stop child murders, black child murders, I expect you to not restate the problem. I expect you to come with a solution. And if you stated that the solution is economic, I expect you to come with some economic solutions. Yes, sir.
So you're telling me that if people were butchering their 5-year-olds for economic reasons, and I came on this show to talk about how horrible this was, you would challenge me by saying I don't have the right to say this is wrong unless I propose a solution to those people's economic problems? That's what you're saying?
No, sir, I'm not saying that.
Well,
it's acknowledged that murdering is wrong, but I would expect you to come with a solution. If the solution is arresting those people, if the solution is blockading, come with that. But you have said that the solution, if you said this, you have said that the solution is providing economic resources. So I expect you to come with the solution of how exactly to do that.
No. You guys brought up the point of the economics issue. I didn't. You brought it up. And you said that how do we go about, if we're not going to allow people to have abortions, how do we go about leveling the playing field, basically, economically? That's what you said, right?
I do not recall. No, those were not my words, but I do recall you saying. But I do recall you saying that some presidential administration, and possibly the current one included, has concluded government policy is that it's less expensive to provide abortions than it is to make sure that there are economic resources in order to provide for the children that were born. I do remember you saying that. You said that.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about the current administration. I was talking about the Johnson administration and about the Eisenhower administration, one in the 1950s and one in the 1960s. And they were suggesting that it was cheaper to put money into population control, which meant black population control, than it was to put money into the black community. It was a $5 versus $100 ratio. And they adopted that mental philosophy. And that's a mental philosophy that continues on. And I'm saying as long as we have that mental philosophy, we're never going to look for the solutions that would eradicate the poverty distinctions between the black community and the white community. We're never going to do that as long as we see that as the potential solution, because it's an easier solution to take. We are human beings, take the path of least resistance. That's our nature.
Well, I could certainly tell you as one female, that aborting an offspring is not a path of least resistance. It's not. It wouldn't be an easy and fun choice at all. So
I never said that.
Okay.
I said our society sees it that way. As long as our society sees that as the easy way out. And by the way, I talk to post-aborted women every day. I've spoken to hundreds of thousands over the years, and some of them do see it as the easy way out. There are all kinds of motivations why people have abortions. But I'm just saying that as long as, and again, perhaps the previous man was right. I do owe you an apology. I should not have gotten as heated with you as I did. And if I was out of line, I apologize for it. But what I'm telling you is that as long as this culture goes by that philosophy that was created back in the 1950s and 1960s, that birth control and abortion are the cheaper ways out of solving what they called the ghetto problem back in those days. As long as that's the way we do it, then we'll never solve the real problems there. Now, what the real solutions to it are, I'm not smart enough to know that, ma'am. I never claimed that I was. And I'm not required to do that simply to tell you that it's wrong to do what we're doing right now. If I were going down the street and I saw a man about to cut the throat of a little kid and I stopped him, you wouldn't ask me if I had a solution to all the problems that were causing this man to cut that little boy's throat. You wouldn't ask me that. But that's what you're asking me here. And I'm telling you, I don't know. I'm not smart enough. I'm just telling you that as long as our attitude is what they said then, that is $5 spent on birth control is better than $100 spent on economic development, as long as that's our attitude, then we'll never have economic development in those communities.
Okay, would you agree with this statement?
Oh, God.
Just this one, which is simply that apparently someone is getting exasperated, so this will be my last question. Would you agree that the solution would be the replacement of the global universal system of racism, white supremacy, with a system of justice?
There's no doubt that if you could reduce the amount of racism in the world, that you could solve some of these problems. Now, you've raised that. Tell me how you're going to do that.
Well, I listen to Gus's show because I'm a black person. I am not an expert on racism, white supremacy, and I listen and tune into white people because I know that they have better access to that type of information. I'm a victim, and so by definition, I am not an expert. Now, apparently, I have been discourteous to other people who want to speak, so I will stop.
There was someone that called area code 213. Are you on the line?
Hi, Gus. Yes, I am.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, this is Yafa. I just wanted to say that I agree with the host, and I really am grateful for his work. And he doesn't have to know everything, but I think where he and the prior caller ran into problems is he really didn't hear her initial question. And unless I'm mistaken, her initial question was, if you don't do abortion, then would it be okay to just have those people not reproduce at all? That's what she said. I really don't think she's a black woman, personally. But she was very rude to you, whatever race she is. She was rude. Well,
is your name Yafa?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I didn't feel like she was rude. She was rude in the sense that she interrupted, but that's a minor deal. Let's get beyond who's rude and who's not. I just don't think that I have to come on here and have a solution to every problem in the world in order to make my point here. Because I'm not the king of the world. I'm not even a very bright person. I don't consider myself a very bright person, so I don't have a solution to all these problems. My only contention was, as I said, as long as we take that attitude that was expressed by Johnson and Eisenhower, a Democrat and a Republican, as long as we take that attitude, we'll never solve these problems because that's the easy way out. And I never said that individual women have abortions. And that's always the easy way out. For some of them it is, for some of them it isn't. But that wasn't my point. Again, what was you're saying I didn't understand her initial question?
Well, initially she asked you, would it be better? And the reason I don't think she was a sister is because she was saying, well, do you think it would be better for those people not to reproduce at all? She didn't start using the inclusive term for herself until the brother requested that you apologize. But for your documentary and your point, what I wanted to say is it did exactly for me what you said. A lot of these things I knew, but they were not all interconnected dots, and you definitely connected a massive amount of dots and clarified a bunch of loose ends and made them a big picture. I'm a big picture person. And I do what you do, try to help clarify people's thinking on certain things by showing them the bigger picture, but I don't have all the answers, and I'm not required to have them, just like you don't have them and you're not required to have them. But what you did do is what you were trying to do, which was make a point and show people things from a perspective that they did not see them before, and I think you did a magnificent job of it, and that's all I wanted to say.
So you've seen the documentary?
Yes.
Good. You know, if her question was, do I think these people who are disadvantaged should not, is she suggesting that they shouldn't be forced to have children or shouldn't have children or whatever?
They should not be allowed to reproduce is what she said. Do you think it would be better if they're not allowed to reproduce at all?
The moment that you say someone should not be allowed to reproduce, you're a eugenicist.
Exactly.
I don't care what your motivation is. That's what you are. So, you know, my argument is not whether someone should or should not get pregnant. That's not my argument. My argument is that once they're pregnant, a baby exists that shouldn't have to lose its life for some reason that it had nothing to do with. That's my argument. So if she's saying, should these people not get pregnant, it depends on whether they want to get pregnant or not. If they choose not to, I have friends that are my age that never had children because they just chose not to have children. Do I think that they're evil? No. Do I think they missed out on a lot in life? I mean, I wouldn't take anything for the experience of having raised my daughter. So, yeah, I think they've missed out on a lot. Now, if they had told me that at one time the woman was pregnant and had an abortion, then that would be the end for us.
I just wanted to check really quick. The caller at 213, are you a non-white person?
This is Dr. Yafabe, Gus. You know I'm a...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was a little confused. Thank you for calling in. My apologies.
You're welcome, sweetheart.
I did want to, I guess, to share a thought just based on what I heard the discussion with the different callers. I think the reason that the caller was asking about a solution to the problem of racism, white supremacy, I've concluded, and we're in agreement, Mr. Crutcher, we are in a global system that is dominated by racism, white supremacy, and I've concluded, as you said at the beginning of the program, that the result is always racism. You were specifically referencing so-called elitism, but the result is always racism, and that's why I was saying that I think it would be logical to say that the foundation is racism, white supremacy. That's why the end result is always that. I feel like...
Well, what I said was manifest itself as racism.
Right, manifested, end result, racism, white supremacy. And I guess my view is that Planned Parenthood, I totally agree. I think the information that you present in Maafa 21, I think it is accurate. I think it is indisputable. This is about racism, white supremacy. This is about controlling the population of non-white people. I'm in 110% agreement. I guess the only thing is that I feel like we could do a documentary like this. As you said, it could have been 20 hours. You could have done 6 hours just on the connections with eugenics and Nazi Germany. Right. That there's so much information on this topic, and I would say that we could have probably done 1,000 documentaries of how so many different companies support racism and practice racism in what they do and have a long history of racism. I'm sure we could do that for Firestone or McDonald's or that. We could probably pick one every day because we're in a system of racism, white supremacy, where the result is always manifested as racism. So I guess if I see a white person doing this film, I could think, well, what we need to do is end abortion. That's you said, Life Dynamics Incorporated. It is against abortion. Your ultimate objective to see abortion as immoral, incorrect, something we shouldn't do. I feel like this could be a white person pointing out racism and abortion to get non-white people and white people to say, well, abortion is incorrect, we shouldn't do that. I feel like what we should be saying is racism, white supremacy is incorrect. Racism, white supremacy produces Planned Parenthood, and if this doesn't work, it'll be something else. You said it's always when one of these objectives falls, it'll be something else. I feel like we should really get to the root. Let's replace white supremacy with justice, and I suspect that the caller wasn't really hearing a solution for that. If I don't have an abortion, I strongly suspect I'm still going to be mistreated. I strongly suspect I'm still going to be in a position where I feel like I can't adequately take care of myself or my offspring. Do you address that aspect of the problem? Do you feel that's an accurate way of looking at it, and do you have any solutions for that aspect of the problem?
I've already said I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I think I made that pretty clear. I came on here to talk about the links between eugenics and abortion.
Right.
What you're saying is a totally different subject.
Okay.
At least I see it that way. Now, you may not see it that way. You may see it as the same subject. I don't see the connection there. But all I'm saying is that she was suggesting that I had to have a solution to that in order for my other work to be legitimate or to have credibility. And that's just simply not true.
Okay. I don't know if she said that your work wasn't credible. If she still,
I said suggested that.
Oh, okay.
You're suggesting that if I don't have solutions to all these manifest social ills in the world,
right,
therefore my work is suspect or is doesn't have as much credibility as it would otherwise, and that's not true.
No, sir.
Oh,
no, sir. I did not. No, sir. I did not say that, nor did I suggest it. I simply said that it did not address the main objective as stated by the host at the beginning of his show, which is to replace the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice.
And what I said was that's not what I came here to talk about. I don't know anything about that subject. Contrary to the fact that I'm white, you can't assume that all white people know all this stuff. We don't.
Well, I know my view would be I feel that you're very informed about racism, white supremacy. You have a lot of information in your documentary film that I think is very informative and would help a non-white person get a better understanding of what racism is and how it works. The only thing that I felt needed to be pointed out was that most of the non-white people that I'm aware of who have seen your work or who know something about Maafa 21, they are not informed about life dynamics. They haven't said anything about that, and they don't seem to be aware that Mr. Crutcher is a white person. And I just found that very interesting, and I felt that the non-white people should really make sure that they're clear that you do have information about how racism, white supremacy has been practiced, focused specifically on Planned Parenthood, but not necessarily looking to replace white supremacy with justice. You don't have information on how we can go about doing that, how we should solve that problem.
Someone said earlier that she didn't feel like she had an insight into this because she's black and that you had to be white to see all this stuff. Well, yeah, I've been white all my life, and I guess I'm 61 years old. I guess I'll be white for whatever part of it's left. And I don't understand it all. I don't pretend to. I mean, we don't have secret meetings where we all get together and plot these things. Believe it or not, that's not what happens. So
again, I'm not saying that you are totally informed about white supremacy, although I certainly think you are much more informed than most of the non-white people I know. Hands down, your documentary, I would say you are much more informed about this. I'm just saying I think it's very important for non-white people that they are aware this is a white person who is doing this work not because they have the intention of replacing white supremacy with justice, but because they have the intention of showing that abortion is incorrect. Abortion should be done away with. We shouldn't be doing that. And I think non-white people, in my view, a lot of non-white people can get easily confused and think, okay, this white person is about replacing white supremacy with justice. And as you said, that's not necessarily the case. The case is I am against abortion, and I'm pointing out how racism has used abortion to attack non-white people. So I'm focusing my documentary in that manner so that people will say, okay, abortion is incorrect. I think it's important that non-white people are aware of that. That's all.
Well, of course, anybody that's seen the DVD, I'm in it.
Of course.
And they're going to figure out pretty quick that I'm white when they see that. There's two white people in the DVD. Everyone else in it is black.
Right.
But, so, I mean, we're not trying to hide the fact. I've never tried to conceal the fact that I'm white. That's
right.
not the issue.
Yes, sir.
But just because I'm white doesn't make me an expert on all these other white supremacist issues. It's just not an area I have enough to do for the last 30 years keeping up with the abortion struggle. I mean, it's complicated enough, and this has been one of the most complex parts of it that I've ever looked at. Because, believe me, this thing is far more involved, far more complicated than you can possibly imagine. And, one of the things that, you asked what our motivation here was. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but something that's been a frustration for the pro-life movement is the fact that, and this has been true ever since I've been involved, which has been, like I said, been over 30 years. If you look at polls on abortion that take people's attitudes, what's your opinion about abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, somewhere in between, whatever, one of the things that's remained constant, although the pro-life position has gained dramatically in just the last 5 or 6 years, to the point now where more people in America identify themselves as pro-life than pro-choice. But if that's the only two options they're given. One of the things that's very frustrating for the pro-life movement is that if you look at these polls and you look at them beyond just the headlines that you see, when these polls are broken down by race, what you find is, and I've never seen a poll that this wasn't true about, blacks consistently are much more pro-life than whites. Consistently. And I've seen some polls that show the percentage difference being as high as in the 20s, that they're 20% more pro-life than the white population. And yet, the pro-life movement is overwhelmingly white. I used to do a seminar called the Life Activist Seminar, and I did them all over the United States and Canada for several years. I had over 15,000 people go to my seminars. Of those 15,000 people, I can assure you that at max 20 of them are black. That's how dominant the white race is in the pro-life movement, despite the fact that on a personal level, the polls all show that blacks are considerably more pro-life than whites. And I've always thought there's something wrong here. The pro-life movement is doing something wrong. When we have a potential constituency out there that says they agree with us, but consistently act in a way that's contrary to what they say they believe. Now, we all do that. All people do that occasionally. But this has been a consistent thing for the last 30 years.
Okay. This works out. This is outstanding. This will be my final comment. I'll check and see if anybody else has anything to say. What you just said, that pretty much nail on the head exactly what I'm saying. We're in a system of white supremacy. The end result, the end manifestation, is always white supremacy, even if we're doing pro-life. The end result, we've got 20 non-white people out of thousands of members. Apparently, the evidence would suggest to me pro-life is practicing white supremacy. That's what I expect. We're in a system of white supremacy. I should see that manifested everywhere as long as people are involved. What I'm saying, wait a minute, hang on 1 second. I just want to finish, then I'll let you comment. That I think it needs to be pointed out. Hey, the individuals, at least one white person, Mr. Mark Crutcher, has concluded, if we can get non-white people to support our objective, we can move them from the white people who are also practicing racism, who have control of how the non-white people think. Non-white people who agree with abortion, they agree with the white people who are racist, who also agree with abortion. We, white people on this side, who also look like we're practicing racism, white supremacy, we can move the non-white people to our side and do our thing. And I'm just saying that non-white people should be aware of that, because basically this could be one group of racists just looking to get control of the football, if you will, to continue practicing racism, but we are against abortion. That's all I'm saying. You just said it exactly. Your organization, pro-life, seems to be exactly practicing racism.
I didn't. You drew a conclusion from that that's untrue.
What's untrue about what I said?
The pro-life movement is not practicing racism.
You just said you all had, what was it? Give us the numbers again so we can be very clear. What were the numbers of white and non-white people in the pro-life movement?
Just because the overwhelming majority of people in the pro-life movement are white doesn't mean those people are practicing racism.
What I said, if we want to be clear about words, that evidence right there would strongly suggest to me there is racism, white supremacy being practiced here. Now, it might not be the case. I could be incorrect, but those numbers, to me, just like you asked with Margaret Sanger, her asking Eugene Fisher, I can't prove that she agrees with everything that he says, but I strongly suspect. I can't prove based on those numbers that the pro-life movement, the white people who say they are pro-life, I can't prove that they are racist white supremacists. But the numbers that you just gave me would strongly suggest, especially when I keep in mind, we're in a system of white supremacy, which you and I agree on, and the end result is always manifested in racism, white supremacy. I would have to strongly suspect that. How could I not?
Well, you've drawn a completely erroneous conclusion.
Okay.
There are reasons that the pro-life movement is overwhelmingly white, and we have looked at this for years and years and years. There are perceptions out there. There have been studies that have done in the African American community looking at why African Americans will say we're pro-life, but we don't participate in the pro-life movement. We even vote against their candidates for office. The primary problem is not one of white versus black. The primary problem is there is a perception, and to some degree it's true, among people outside the pro-life movement, both black and white, that the pro-life movement is overwhelmingly Republican. There's also a perception outside the pro-life movement that it is almost exclusively Catholic. Well, using me as an example, I'm not a Republican. I've got no more use for the Republican Party than I got for the Democratic Party. Not only that, I'm not Catholic. I'm Southern Baptist. But the problem is that the perception outside the movement is that that's who we are. We're white, conservative, Republican Catholics.
Racist?
I don't think there's a perception that they're racist. I've never heard that except from you. But what I'm saying to you is that I think there's a problem in that when I say the pro-life movement has a problem, and the problem is the fault of the pro-life movement, that we have not attracted blacks into the movement as much as we should have, but the fault is not racism. The fault is that we haven't fought against these stereotypes of us being Republican Catholics. I can tell you from vast experience in this particular area that there are enormous numbers of people in the pro-life movement who are not conservative, who are not Republican, and who are not Catholics. And for example, if you go back and study, if you just want to look at the Catholic issue, prior to the abortion issue coming to the front, the vast majority of Catholics in this country voted Democrat, for example. I mean, you're talking about a voting bloc that was almost as big in percentage as the black voting bloc is in voting Democrat. But today it's about 50-50. But I have spoken in many, many avenues, events where this issue came up, and I can tell you that there are an enormous number of people in the pro-life movement who, if the abortion issue were settled today, would be Democrats tomorrow. Okay. Because that's their leanings, and these people are predominantly Catholic.
Okay. I just want to point out. Hang on. I just want to point out from what you just said. You said that you feel the pro-life movement, they suffer from being perceived as Republican, Catholic, conservative. To me, those sound like code words that I hear used to say that these are white people who are racist. To me, I strongly suggest, especially given the numbers that you said about the organization and how few non-white people are involved, I strongly suspect it could be that a lot of non-white people who might agree with the pro-life movement and be against abortion, they suspect that these are white people who are racist. And I would look at your video as Exhibit A, hey, if we look like we are against racism, we can get non-white people to join our cause and support our issue. Not that we're about replacing white supremacy, not that we don't even practice racism, because the evidence to me suggests that you do. But just if we give the look that we're against racism, we can even point out how something we don't like, it's racist, and get these non-white people to support our cause of being against abortion, not against replacing white supremacy with justice. I think that sounds exactly like what you said, even though you're saying that my conclusion is incorrect. That's, I mean, bang, I feel like that is nail on the head to the T. But I wanted to check the other two people before we get ready to wrap up, because I also want to give you time to respond. The other two people, if you're still on the line, do you have any final questions or comments for Mr. Crutcher before I give him an opportunity to respond?
I am on the line. Whoever else is on the line, I want them to respond.
Did you have anything you wanted to say, or is that it?
I did. I wanted to say that I think that you hit the nail right on the head, or if you're talking about hitting a nail, I think you hit it squarely. And Exhibit B for me is the trailer to the movie Bruno. They're still visible on YouTube. I have it on my show page, Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer, and when you play that video, which highlights and promos a movie that abuses a black infant, in which a black infant is nothing but his diaper and is sitting or is being held by a white male in a full-on beekeeper suit while the bees are swarmed all over this black infant. There's another scene in the promo, and this is connected to the issue of this show. There's another scene in the promo trailer in which this black infant is sat on a motorcycle and recklessly driven out in traffic without a helmet, as if that's funny. And the programs, the computer programs, I think they're called heuristics, that generate the types of ads that are responded to by people who like this film and who like those promos are anti-Obama stickers, are pro-life stickers, are Republican stickers. All I'm saying is Exhibit B. The people who like to see the abuse of black infants seem to be the people who also don't like having a black president and who believe that Republicans in the pattern of Ronald Reagan, where ketchup was a vegetable, it is A-OK. And this is something that's generated by the computer heuristics of, I believe, Google. So I don't know.
Are you? Wait a minute. Are you saying that our trailer shows the things you described?
No, sir. I was referencing a promo to a film called Bruno, which is no longer in the theaters. But it was
what does that have to do with mine?
Well, I am showing what it has to do with. It has to do with the types of people who support anti-abortion. Okay, so when you said it is an incorrect perception of anybody that the same types of people who are anti-abortionists are also people who seem to be practicing racism, white supremacy, I'm saying that there is a lot of evidence that is an incorrect statement.
You know, what you're saying there and what Gus just said a moment ago are so preposterous. I'm just going to have to pass on saying I don't know how to respond. I mean, it's just so unbelievable. I'm just going to have to pass. I don't know what to say.
Okay. Well, and again, I could be incorrect, but, I just make sure people are clear. It might have been that I didn't say it clearly. What I'm saying is, you said you all, the pro-life movement, the white people who are in opposition to abortion, they do not have very many non-white members. And non-white people and white people seem to be aware of this. I'm saying that, to me, that strongly suggests these white people practice racism, white supremacy. I could be incorrect, but the evidence would suggest that, especially since we are in a system of white supremacy.
You say the evidence would suggest that. There is no evidence to suggest that.
The numbers that you just cited, that would be evidence in my view. Are you saying that's irrelevant? The number of non-white members that you have. Wait a minute. Are you saying that is irrelevant? The number of non-white people who are members of the pro-life movement, that is irrelevant to discussing whether or not the white people who support pro-life are racist. Are you saying that's irrelevant?
I'm saying those are two entirely separate issues. Yes.
Are you? You said yes. That is irrelevant. Did you say yes?
Right.
Okay. Well, I disagree. I think that is relevant. A group of individuals, if we're considering, are these white people racist or not, I think that would be relevant. If they're part of a group, how many non-white people are in the group? If I don't see very many non-white people in a group of thousands, I would say that would be evidence that might suggest these white people are racist. And I could be incorrect about that.
You are so far out in left field, I suspect you can't even see home plate from where you are.
Okay. Well, I'm not in front of a baseball field right now. So,
well, it's a metaphor. But
at any rate, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed the conversation. I do think you have a ton of constructive information, but, the evidence would suggest the white people in your organization most likely are practicing racism, white supremacy, too. And that could be incorrect.
That is so unbelievable. If I had known that your powers of deductive reasoning would cause you to believe such a thing, from me making that statement that the pro-life movement is overwhelmingly white, I would be very reluctant to believe that your powers of reasoning on any of this stuff is reasonable.
That might be true.
Because that is the most unbelievable conclusion I have ever, and I've done thousands of radio interviews. I have never heard anyone, and a lot of them I've been done with pro-aborts, I've never heard anyone leap to a conclusion like that based on absolutely nothing.
Okay. Well, I could be incorrect. Everything that you just said could be correct. However, I don't think so. At any rate, thank you for sharing your time with us today. I very much appreciate it. I do think you have constructive information in Maafa 21, and I hope non-white people will check it out and come to their own conclusions.
Okay.
Mr. Mark Crutcher, founder and president of Life Dynamics Incorporated. Groovy. Mark Crutcher, suspected racist white supremacist. I think anybody who heard that, I think that was real lucid. My powers of deductive reasoning might be meager. That could be true. I've never said that I'm smart. I'm an ignorant victim of racism, white supremacy, thoroughly retarded, for sure. So what he said could be correct. But for him to say that the non-white people who agree with the white people in his organization that they don't like abortion, but they're not in the group. They have a teaspoon of non-white people in an organization of thousands, and to say that that wouldn't suggest that these white people practice racism, white supremacy, in a system designed to produce racism, white supremacy, I don't know. That doesn't seem like a far leap. I do want to point out, I think that was the first time we ever had a white person be speechless on the program, being presented with evidence that his organization is a racist white supremacist. I think that is a first, a white person being speechless on the program. Did you have any thoughts, Cree, if you're still with us?
I am, yes, that was a superb show. I thought, well, I don't think I do have anything to add. I think it speaks for itself. The only thing that I have to add is that, like I've said on my blog, every black person has to decide for themselves whether or not they are talking to or looking at another black person. So for the good doctor who thought that I was not a black female, she will have to decide that, and all the other people who listen will have to decide that for themselves. But I will state for the record, I'm making a statement, and you'll have to decide whether or not it's a true statement. I am a black female, nappy hair, dark skin.
Okay. I am familiar with this non-white individual, and I had concluded that she is a non-white person, victim of white supremacy. I could be incorrect. I have not seen her with my own eyes, so she could have fooled me. That is, and as Mr. Crutcher said, my powers of deductive reasoning might be meager, so I could be incorrect, but I don't think this is a white person. I haven't seen any evidence that would lead me to believe that she is a white person. Could be wrong. She could have fooled us. He could have got us all, Cree. I did want to point out, just making an effort to be objective. There is someone who is listening to the program who did not think this was a constructive program, apparently, and they said that the host, Gus T Renegade, is I don't want to say they used an expletive, effing coward, and that they were suspect of my loyalty to black women, and that it was, I want to see if I can still get it, they were disgusted that I would allow Mr. Crutcher to, I guess, disrespect or be discourteous to you, Cree. And they felt that that was total cowardice, that they would never listen to the program again and would tell others not to listen to it, and that I am not loyal to non-white females, black females specifically. That's what they said. I would like to say that could be true. Everything that they said could be true. That the host, Gus T Renegade, I won't say the word effing coward, for not intervening and saying something when Mr. Crutcher got discourteous with Cree. In my view, he was discourteous. That could be completely true. I did not do that. Perhaps I should have. I have concluded it is much more effective to have the white person be the one yelling, screaming, cursing, getting upset. In fact, Gus might be a real coward because I have had a 10-year-old non-white female on the program and had the exact same thing happen, and I didn't intervene then either. I've had white people be here and be disrespectful to justice, a 10-year-old non-white female. So I might be a total coward for not sticking up and doing that. I guess the only thing, and I'll even concede, forget the program, I have observed non-white people being disrespected and mistreated by white people every day of my life, and I have not intervened to jack up a white person, beat them down, shoot somebody. I have never done that. So the evidence would strongly suggest, yes, your host is a coward. However, I would say as long as the system of white supremacy exists, I seriously doubt you're going to be able to find a non-white person who can say, I don't allow other non-white people to be mistreated in my presence. If you ever find a non-white person who can say that truthfully, stop listening to this show immediately. Go get that person, follow them around, hang out with them. That's who you need to be with and listening to, not Gus T Renegade. So I wanted to make sure that was out there. Gus T Renegade, coward, yes. That I don't know what they mean, but if they mean not intervening when you see a non-white person being mistreated, yes, that would fit completely. Yes, yes, yes. Did you have any thoughts, and this might not even be a black woman. We have discrepancy around that. That's the confusion that we have. There's discrepancy as to whether she's a black person. This could be a white person that we're talking to, so all that might be out the trash. Cree could be practicing racism, apparently. Did you have any thoughts on the way he responded to you?
I did. I thought that he was pushing emotional buttons because he was being pressed to answer a question that, quite frankly, as somebody who does host a show, I know that sometimes it's, you make a decision not to press an issue as a host that you hope that your callers will press, because if you do it as the host, you may lose that guest. That guest could hang up on you. And so I felt like he was being pressured to answer a question that he really did not intend to answer, and so he got snippy with me. I didn't feel at all abused, and I have to say, to the contrary, I felt extremely supported by the things that you had to say at some of the junctures of the discussion with Mr. Crutcher and I. I felt very supported by what you had to say, and I thought that it was an excellent exhibition in can behave when they do not want to answer a question. I think that's what I to say.
Okay. And again, perhaps she's a white person, maybe. who knows? But you have her feedback since she was here. Again, the way I'll share, the way I set the program up, this is really all just for learning and education. That's why it's in the education category, to learn about racism, white supremacy. I feel it's great when you get an opportunity to observe a white person practicing racism and being rude about answering a question, the way that they respond and speak to non-white people. I think that is informative. My view, non-white people are very confused about this. A lot of non-white people, we've been programmed and conditioned to worship white people. That needs to be eroded. I think this is a part of the process. I even would say that's constructive. To have a non-white person upset that another non-white person didn't stick up for a non-white person, that is great. We are making progress. If we had more non-white people with that attitude, our team would be much, much, much better. I don't even remember the last time somebody got angry with me because I didn't defend another I don't remember. I have to seriously think. It's been years since I've heard a non-white person fuss with me because I didn't defend another non-white person. So, hey, we are making a little progress. Maybe our team is getting better. I'm sorry?
That's true, too, because I also wanted to say how much I actually appreciated that support. I know it sounds contradictory.
Yeah.
I appreciated his support, and I also appreciated yours. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's true, so I agree with you.
I do too. That's great. I wish you can. I hope it will inspire other non-white people to take the same stance, to feel like they should be sticking up. They should not tolerate a non-white person being mistreated on their watch. That is their concern. Right on. And then I'll say the person's handle, the game fanatic. That was the person. You all should give that person a kudos. And I hope they're honest though. That's the only thing. I hope that person can be honest. Are you, or have you been in a position where you have observed non-white people being mistreated and you didn't do anything? Let's be honest. That's the only thing I'll ask. Yes, I'm a coward. I've done it all the time. Probably will do it tomorrow. You, as a non-white, if you're a non-white person, I strongly suspect you've been in the same position. I just want to make sure we're being honest with each other and ourselves about that. Very important. Cree, did you want to share next program? Do you know next program, Dr. Welsing? Any progress?
No, I don't have anything to share at this time. I will continue to say I cannot. I think you are inventing a new Olympic sport. So in the next 8 to 12 years, we should expect to see scheduling and performance of DTR counter-racist radio shows as an Olympic event.
We hopefully so. Hopefully so. It would be really great if this was obsolete in 8 years, that we have done away with. Oh, my Lord, that was incredible. Another reason I let these white people ride a lot of times, generally I bank on the fact that the white people that I request to come on the program, that they are very informed. Mr. Crutcher, very informed. He was rambling. People say Mr. Fuller rambles. This guy was rambling, but he did have constructive information, and I know a lot of non-white people who are not informed about Margaret Sanger and the connections to Planned Parenthood. I didn't agree at all. Him saying that I was suggesting his work was not credible. It is. He has great information. It just needs to be pointed out. His group is most likely racist too. It's not like, this is like another racist pointing a finger at a different racist saying that person is racist. Like, just don't want to be fooled. That's all. But he does have great information. He said that experiment where he talked about the problem, I wrote that was huge, where he said if you tell people that there is no solution to this problem, they will be less likely to come up with a solution. If you condition people to think this problem cannot be solved, they become much less likely to solve the problem. That is what white people have done with racism, white supremacy. They have, all the white people that come on this show, it's complicated. It's complex. He said it today. That's 3 white people in a row who have said it's complicated. It's complex. That was Robert Jensen. He said it about 20 times in a 1-hour program. Charles M6, he said it whatever day that program was, Sunday. This guy, Mark Crutcher, he said the same thing. It's complex. It's complicated. They want you to think this problem is insurmountable. It will be here forever. It's organic and ordained by God. That's the way they want you to think about this. As long as you have that position, they know it is very unlikely that anybody will make an effort to solve this problem. They'll just accept it and move on. You need to think, no, this problem can be solved, and I intend on doing it in my lifetime. It can. The fact that these white people are upset about Cree's program and mistreating her show. She lost the program with Dr. Welsing. That right there is evidence. The fact that they're interfering with this program and other Truth Will Out interfering with her program. Just non-white people making an effort to talk about racism. That right there tells me they know this could be dismantled. Racism, white supremacy is a problem that can be solved. If they didn't think that, they would leave us alone. I'd probably have my MacBook Pro. If white people felt like this was futile, I'd probably have it already because they know who cares. It's just a monkey on a computer. He'll be a victim forever. Give him 20 MacBook Pros. Who cares? That's not the case. White people, Tim Wise, they are wasting their time, they are investing their time and energy to obstruct this program, Cree's program, Truth Will Out, other non-white people who are doing shows about racism. They are making a specific effort, I suspect, to disrupt these programs. The problem can be solved. You just need to think, how do you go about doing it? I would suggest reading Mr. Fuller's work, listen to Cree's program, Dr. Welsing. Hopefully this program is in the ballpark. It can be done. You just need to get a better understanding of how it works and adjust your behavior. I will end with that one. We should be back tomorrow. Katrina Brown. I can't even say it. Katrina Brown, she descendant of slave owners, and she did a masterful documentary about her white ancestors. They played with the shackles with gloves on. They had slave victuals. I mean, the only thing I can hope is that she will be serious so that we can have a real conversation tomorrow and perhaps talk about how to solve this problem. That's what I hope, that we can have a respectful adult conversation. Using that term real loosely, I'm not an adult, but I hope we can have a courteous, constructive dialogue and perhaps talk about solving problems, because if it's just going to be white people going to have slave victuals and moan and whine about their complicity in being racist white supremacists, well, we'll be watching these forever. But yeah, tomorrow, Katrina Brown, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central. Tomorrow, Katrina Brown, Traces of the Trade. And we got weekend shows too. Dr. Joy Degree Leary, she'll be here on Sunday, post-traumatic slave syndrome, and Reverend Robert Chase. He will be here on Saturday. He's a white person. That's all you need to know is a white person. You should just come and hear a white person chatting about racism, white supremacy. Yeah, that's the shows for the week. Tim Wise confirmed. January 29th, Tim Wise, third trip to the cows. I'm excited. I hope people will listen in live. I think I have time and everything, but Tim Wise, third trip to the cows. I'm fit to be tied. That was the best so-called Christmas gift I could have got. Tim Wise, third trip to the cows, January 29th. That is a Friday. Should be game. I think that's it. Make sure you support Back of the Bus, his blog, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. One more time, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. If you're going to, please support my blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. Do you have your blog memorized today, Cree? Oh, she might have bailed. I'll do it for her. Cree's blog is cree7.wordpress.com. There we go. cree7.wordpress.com. Support her efforts as well. Very constructive work. Cree7. Thank you for calling in and asking some tough questions for Mr. Crutcher. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you all. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Yeah. We're out. Thank you for supporting the cows. We'll be back tomorrow. Cows signing out.